Hridaya kamala madhye rajitam nirvikalpam sadasadakhila bhedathitameka swarupam prakriti vikriti shunyam nityamanandamurtim vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnan bhajamaha nirupamam ati sukshmam nishprapancham niriham Gagana sadishamisham sarva bhutadivasham Triguna rahita satchit brahma rupam varenyam Vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnan bhajamaha Vitaritum mati tirnam jnana bhakti prashantihi Pranaya galita chittam jiva dukha sahishnam Dhrita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam Vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnan bhajamaha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In the middle of the lotus of the heart, Hridaya Kamala Madhyam, I meditate upon that effulgent reality, Rajitam, which is beyond all concepts and all thoughts, Nirvikalpam. That stainless essence nature is one without a second, beyond the touch of the gunas. That one who is the very image of bliss, eternal, resplendent in the middle of the lotus of the heart as my very own essence nature. I praise that one which is the supreme reality, as vast as the sky, though still the indweller in all beings. That one who is beyond the mind and beyond the body, and yet in whom the mind and body shine forth. That one which is called God, the Lord of all. I praise that stainless one. At this moment I praise that one who from time to time takes incarnation in historicity as a living, breathing individual, moved by compassion for the struggles and suffering of humanity. That one teaches the highest peace through devotion and knowledge. That stainless Jesus Christ, Buddha, Krishna, Rama, Shri Ramakrishna, I adore. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namah. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, I praise that establisher of dharma, Sthapakaya cha dharmasya, who is the embodiment of all religious predispositions. Sarvadharma swarupine, that incarnation of the absolute avatara varishta par excellence. I offer all of this at that altar, at the lotus feet of that one. Om, peace, peace, peace. Om Ganganeshaya Om Gurbhyo Namaha Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om Jayama Jayama. So first and foremost, may the fourth be with you. I was of a mind to give a talk, obviously like a Star Wars themed talk, given the occasion. And it would be very easy to do. Because as you know, so much of Star Wars, like George Lucas's conception for things like the Force and the Jedi Order, and I mean like, it's pretty on the nose, right? It's like Mace Windu, Mace Hindu, Yoda, like yoga, like, I mean, come on. But also it's important to remember that George Lucas was personal friends with Joseph Campbell, and much of what he conceived of regarding the Force and regarding the mystical tradition that is pervasive throughout the film franchise, like a lot of that comes from, I would argue, his friendship with Joseph Campbell and just the ideas that were present in San Francisco at the time. And it's important to note that Joseph Campbell's guru is none other than Swami Nikhilanandaji. So like when we think of Joseph Campbell and Campbellian contributions to like American culture, they're quite significant actually. They're huge contributions to American culture. For example, Joseph Campbell's like analysis of myth is very important and incredibly Ramakrishnan in orientation, because notice there's this view prior to Campbell, maybe the dominant academic view, that like all these myths in the world, they all have a common origin. So say there's some like Indo-European archetypical myth, and then as all these different Indo-European communities break off, let's say the Sanskritic tradition on one end, the Avastani tradition on the other, and of course the Avastani or like the Parsi community and the Sanskritic or Indus Valley civilizations, like these are very old Indo-European traditions, but you can see like, you know, the Greek tradition, the Armenian tradition, and of course the Gaelic Celtic traditions. These are all Indo-European traditions that share common mythic structures. Like even on my YouTube channel, there's like someone I think from the Gaelic tradition who is like excitedly and enthusiastically commenting on all of my videos, and it's exciting, it's very nice to see, because they're providing like Gaelic words for things that I'm talking about in my videos, like in Sanskrit. So when I present the idea of, like, say, dharana, concentration, which leads to dhyana, meditation, which then leads to samadhi. When I present words from the Yoga Sutra like nirodha, yogas chitta vritti nirodha, the state of yoga is the cessation of all thought constructs. Like, when I present things like this, members of the Gaelic community who are deeply steeped in those emic or indigenous traditions, they can see parallels immediately, insofar as even the etymologies of their words match the Sanskrit words. And so you can look at the word Ahura Mazda, compare that to the word Asura. Like, obviously, linguistically speaking, all of these language groups share a common origin. So you'll find, like, even in English, the word use, to use something, that is the same root as one of the oldest roots in the Sanskrit language, yuj, which of course is the root that forms the word yoga. So yoga, as we learn in the Chandogya Upanishad, is synonymous with tapasya, which means any kind of spiritual practice that's meant to bring you, quote unquote, closer to a spiritual goal. So for yoga to be a yoga, for it to be an upaya, a means, a technique, a way, it must be useful. And for it to work, you must use it. So the word yoga, from the root yuj, often it's understood to be like to yoke or something like that. But I think a more basic understanding of the root yuj, and of course Sanskrit is one language where each root has like innumerable variations of meaning. It's very multivalent in that way. So yoga, from the root yuj, yoke to yoke, I think it's better just to read that as to use. Yoga is anything useful. In fact, the word yoga is sometimes used to describe like astrological events, the conjunct of two planets, or the word yoga might refer to the way you tie a boat to the post at the harbor. You know, the word yoga, you can also refer to like sexual union. It means so many different things, but the context in which it's typically invoked as a word is when we talk about spiritual practices, means or techniques, in other words, upayas. So this yuj, use, you find it in English, or the word tantra, like the root tan, to expand, you find that in words like tentacle or tender or tentative, you know, so roots can be traced throughout the languages. And of course, mythological structures too. You can take, for instance, the Vedic idea of the Ashwins, the two horsemen, and match that one-to-one to the idea of like the Dioskoroi in the Greek tradition. I might be pronouncing that wrongly. Or you can take ideas like Dhumavati, and you can see clearly her corollary in the Gaelic tradition is the An Morgan, or even more importantly, like the Cailleach. There was a time, and as Usha Harding points out in her book, there was a time when Scotland and the Irish regions, like all of that was called Caledonia, or at least a large chunk of that was called Caledonia. And Caledonia means the land of the Cailleach. And the Cailleach, of course, you can see the easy link here between Kali and the Cailleach, is like a crone-type goddess, who is a harvest goddess, often depicted in this like Grim Reaper-esque fashion, holding a sickle, which is, of course, a farming instrument. And you'll see even in modern like spiritual forms like the tarot, which emerges out of Italy, like arguably in the Renaissance period, which has now become a very popular medium through which people interact with mystical ideas. Even the symbol of death, he's riding this horse, he's a skeletal figure, and he's triumphing over popes and kings and whatnot, and he's like heralding a rebirth. And in the background of the death card in the Rider-Waite Tarot or the Waite-Smith Tarot, you'll see there's like a reference to the card the moon. You'll see those two towers. Maybe a Lord of the Rings reference there somewhere. But like there's this idea of like death and transformation. But again, this figure who is riding a horse, who is skeletal, is carrying a sickle. And that sickle is used for the harvest. So it's often when you cut down paddy, that's when you can turn it into rice. And the idea of cutting down the paddy and then husking it is obviously so evocative, because we have deeply epigenetic memories about the harvest, about being an agricultural community, which by the way is when a lot of these spiritual edifices, which we call modern religions, were concocted. So when we think about like the sickle, we can also see easy references in Khalil Gibran to like the idea of love being like a threshing floor, where the unhusked paddy comes to be husked. And if we don't accept the violence of that, if we don't allow the north wind to lay waste the garden, to use some of Gibran's language, then we will never cry all of our tears or laugh all of our laughter. There's this idea that there's like a fuller, richer life that can be had once we subject ourselves to this somewhat violent and disturbing process called threshing. So death, or Kali, representing time, which is of course synonymous with death, with endings, with temporality, is synonymous for many of us who are in the spiritual line of work with transformation, with rebirth. So it's something that we crave. The death card is no longer scary, it's exciting. Time is no longer a tyranny, but a wonderful dynamic presence that matures and ripens and sweetens. So with that said, the sickle that you see with the death card in the Rider-Smith Tarot, or the Waite-Smith Tarot, and the sickle that you see with Cailleach, and that you see with the Grim Reaper, obviously that sickle is such a profound metaphor for time. And it's kind of cute that like even the Marxist communities will use a sickle as their symbol, because often they're destructive and evocative of that Kali energy. But coming back to this idea of the Cailleach, you'll see in the Gaelic Scottish communities, the Cailleach, which was, the contribution to the name Caledonia, she's a harvest goddess representing time, death, transformation, which can, of course, at times be very scary and which, of course, can be disturbing, but which is ultimately coveted. So she's the national deity of the Caledonian region. And it's argued that people who have the name Kelly, the Irish community, some people have the name Kelly, that's like the Irish equivalent of the Brahmanas. Like it's the Irish equivalent of the name, I don't know, Chattotpadhyaya or something like that, or, there's some Brahmin names of Bhattacharya. Bhattacharya is a famous Brahmin name. Bhatta means like revered and Acharya means teacher. So a lot of Brahmanas who come from an ancestry of teaching and spiritual knowledge, their name literally on their birth certificate would be Bhattacharya, which means the revered teacher. So these are names in the Indic communities that refer to someone of Brahmin descent, meaning of the priest class. Similarly, in the Irish community, someone with the name Kelly might very likely have come from a lineage of worshippers and priests of the goddess Cailleach. So take these mythological structures, whether it's the Ashwins and the Dioscoroi, or like the Dyaus, the Vedic Dyaus and the Greek Zeus, or like the connection between, say, Indra as a storm god to Zeus as a storm god, or like the ideas of maybe early Armenian traditions. Like all of these are obviously mythological structures which reference one another. So you could say, okay, there's like a parent myth, an overarching Indo-European language. You can call it Proto-Indo-European or something. And then you can take that same idea into the mythological world. You can say there's a Proto-Indo-European mythological understanding of the universe, and then that is disseminated throughout cultures through like diaspora. So maybe like there are communities in what is now modern day northern India, Pakistan, what is now maybe Bangladesh, and you say those communities might have migrated into Central Asia, and that's why you find in the Mongolian context a lot of these mythological structures also reference Greek or Gaelic or Avestani or Sanskritic mythological traditions. And then other communities might have moved into Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland and what we now call Scotland and Ireland, and therefore they brought their myths with them. Maybe other communities might have even crossed the oceans and ended up in places like Hawaii or something, and there they would have restored their myths, albeit with variations. So if you look at Guyanese Indians, a lot of them might not even be Indians, but because there was a huge Indian diaspora into Guyana and various places in the Pacific Islands like that, like Jamaica and whatnot, you find that there's a big cultural overlap. This is as a result of the British colony. So you see diasporic movements all the time in the ancient world, in the contemporary world, and it stands to reason that just like languages share things in common, mythological structures also share things in common, and that's because of diasporic movements. But Joseph Campbell does something very interesting. He says, perhaps it's not so much that there's one parent myth that everybody is drawing from, but perhaps there's something more archetypical, like more universal. Perhaps there is like a common human condition shared by all people everywhere, and even without cultural exchange, they will all arrive at the same conclusions, each according to their own spiritual insight. And so the idea here is that there's like a core spiritual metaphysical truth, and everybody everywhere has access to it. And over the past however many thousand years that we've been a civilized, like post-agrarian community, we've all been drawing from that same truth. Not necessarily, culturally speaking, from the same geographical region or the same mythological or linguistic community, but from something even deeper than that. So the idea that truth is to be found beyond cultures, beyond history, beyond even language and psychology is a deeply, deeply important idea to Sri Ramakrishna. So you can see Campbell, the way he contributes to the mythological conversations that we have, even in an academic context, what to say of a pop culture context where his influence is probably most strongly felt. You can see that he's pushing things in a Ramakrishnan direction. He's saying instead of thinking in a culturally constructivist way, instead of thinking in like, historicity, instead of humanizing things, perhaps we can understand that there's something profound, something real, something true, something absolute, and that every human everywhere, regardless of how they're interacting with neighboring cultures or faraway cultures, has access to. And so what is religion but a culturally conditioned, geographically oriented response to truth? But the thing about that truth is that it's corroborated by all these various cultures across continents, across geographical and cultural contexts. And that's exciting. This corroboration itself is quite exciting. So you can see Campbell, Joseph Campbell, is then maybe referencing a bit of Jung here to say that it's not just a personal subconscious, a repository for my own sexual hang-ups, like, and thoughts of my mother. Like, actually, Sai and I, the other day, we had this exciting idea. What about things that go into your eye? Because I think I was putting some belladonna on the sides of your eyes or something. It's like, what if something goes into the eye? Is there like a pocket at the back of my eye where things are just like stored? Like when I drop my guitar pick inside the hole of the acoustic guitar and the pick just sits there and bounces around for like eternity? Is there like some repository behind my eyeballs in which all the various substances we've ingested are just like hanging out? Or like particles of things, dust from the Arizona desert or whatever, just like kicking around in the back of my eye. I don't know. So we're just like this idea of a repository where things are just stored unbeknownst to us. Like, that's the idea of the subconscious mind. And in Freud's materialist language, we each carry our own subconscious repository filled with our own images. Therefore, it makes no sense to analyze dreams, because often the images that we see in our dreams, which arise from this subconscious realm of repression, this is going to be entirely personal. Like, there's no overlap between what I see in my dream and what you see in your dream. But if you extend the idea and you take Jung's collective unconscious quite seriously, then you'll see that it's not so much that we just, each and every one of us, carry around this repressed realm in which we think about our mothers, but it's also that we, yes, and that can also be true, but it's also that we share in some collective pool, some hive mind, if you will, some subconscious that is transpersonal. And therefore it can be interpersonal. So now it makes sense to analyze dreams, because now the images that I see in my dreams are shared images. So there are themes, there are motifs, there are tropes that appear across the board. And like somebody like Jung, who talks to a lot of people over the course of like decades long career, he might eventually write something like the Red Book, which he did, by the way. And it's like he gets alchemical and he gets mystical because he's looking at something that is trans-psychological. Just like Campbell is looking at something that is trans-cultural or trans-historical. What Jung is doing is also he's looking at something that is trans-psychological. And therefore we enter into the realm of spirituality, which I was arguing last week. It goes way beyond our culture, our race, our religion. Really, it goes beyond our religion too. The idea that spirituality can go beyond religions, which I'm choosing to define as institutionalized, geographical, cultural responses to this truth, which Jung articulates in psychological terms, which Campbell illustrates in mythological terms, which poets illustrate in artistic terms. That shared realm, that common reality, the collective unconscious or the archetypical myth or the perennial truth or something, as Aldous Huxley would call it, that's something that Campbell, I think, uniquely adds to the discussion about myths. So now it's like there's not this one parent myth that emerged in a culturally constructed fashion somewhere in Indo-European, wherever that is, and then spread throughout the lands all the way to Caledonia and into Armenia and into Persia and of course into India. Like, it's not that. It's that perhaps these cultures might not have had the overlap that we expect them to have. And instead, they each of them independently arrived at these same mythological structures, pointing to something at least intersubjective, if not outright objective. Isn't that remarkable? So what this does is very important. In a postmodern era, where we are introduced to tremendous relativity in all fields, like Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture is like relativist architecture, or like in art, when we have relativist art, Cubism, Impressionism, in psychology, of course, like relativism, and of course in physics, even our very understanding of the physical world has been reduced to relativism. If everything is relative, then maybe nothing is true. That's one conclusion that people derive from a postmodern understanding. Because of postmodernism, we live in a post-truth world. How can there be truth when there are so many different religions, all of them saying contradictory things? How can there be even truth in matter when the whole thing is relative to this thing called light, which we don't even fully understand, which is both a particle and a wave, which is full of contradictions, like we find with the Copenhagen interpretation and whatnot. So what this ends up doing to many people, to the mind, is that it ends up lapsing into a kind of nihilism or a kind of defeatism, where we just give up on truth claims. So a lot of people, I guess, are pushed into atheism, mostly because they're confronted with a hyper-global world which introduces tremendous amounts of relativity, such that every claim is counteracted by its equal and opposite claim, leading people to take no claim seriously whatsoever. And so what Campbell does, what Jung does, and I'm going to point to Ramakrishna in just a moment, what they do is so important, because they say, no, just because things are relative doesn't mean there's no truth. They must be relative to something. Like, if time and space are to be relative, then they're relative to light. So there is a constant. light is the constant and the absolute. If all these various myths are more or less the same, but they also have contradictory elements, then they are probably all of them variations on something true and absolute and real and unchanging. Just like light is the constant in Einsteinian physics, about which time and space can shift and move. Just like that, the truth, or we're going to call it God, is that absolute around which psychological tropes and ideas circulate, around which mythological structures appear and reappear and disappear only to be regurgitated again in the movie Star Wars or something like that. Do you know? So things are changing, but just because they're changing doesn't mean they're without ground, without truth. So if you claim that a river is flowing, you automatically indicate the riverbed. There must be something unchanging, or at least relatively less changing, to be able to host change. Do you know? And so like, this is a very important idea. If myths are the same, they must be pointing to a common center. And even when they're different, they must be different in that they're all relative takes of a common center. So what we discover in physics with Einsteinian relativity, what we articulate in architecture, what we express in poetry and music and art, and also what we contemplate about in mythological and linguistic like conversations, both in pop culture and of course also in the academic sense, all of that is pointing to something, and that we call God, that absolute, which we can call by any name, and the names are like totally secondary here. Just like the mythological structures and the ritual structures and the religious edifices are secondary and peripheral. So it's uniquely important that today on May 4th, we think of George Lucas and his relationship to Joseph Campbell. It's important that we think of Joseph Campbell's contribution to mythology and put it alongside Jung's contribution to psychology, the collective unconscious idea. And we put that alongside even Frank Lloyd Wright and like John Keats and various artists of the similar vein. And we put that alongside Einstein and maybe Gödel and maybe Heisenberg, who in the world of mathematics and physics and hard science have articulated the same kind of relativity. If we think of all of these things, we're noticing how Sri Ramakrishna and his influence has like spread all over the world through all the different industries and means of knowledge, like in epistemology, in axiology, in metaphysics, like in religious studies, but of course far beyond religion and spirituality, in architecture, for crying out loud. And so I just want to make this point that Campbell was indeed initiated into the Ramakrishna lineage, and his guru was none other than Swami Nikhilanandaji of the Vedanta Society of New York, which Swami Vivekananda founded in 1896. So Swami Vivekananda, this is so interesting, wanted to get an organization together, but was very reluctant to do so, because he knew the moment he organized, that would turn this whole thing into an institution, into a bureaucracy. It would take spirituality and concretize it into religion. And Sri Ramakrishna was very afraid of starting another religion. Like the last thing he wants to do is add another Pokemon to the Pokemon battle. And that's why like he was very careful about the name Sri Ramakrishna, because the moment he said Sri Ramakrishna and attributed these ideas to a singular person, it was just like pitting my avatar against your avatar. You have the Christ, they have the Buddha, somebody else might have the Prophet Muhammad. Here's a Ramakrishna. And now here are like 4 different sources of truth. Sometimes they say the same thing, sometimes they contradict. And the risk here is either you pick one at the exclusion of the other, or you just lapse into a postmodern, post-truth, relativist nihilism where you say nothing must be true. You know, so Sri Ramakrishna as a figure, as a person, as a prophet is not that important to Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna as a Shakti, as power, as vibhuti, as an influence, like which expresses itself intellectually and emotionally and artistically, that was what Swami Vivekananda challenged. So he was not here to represent a person, he was here to represent an energy that took the form, perhaps, in historicity of at one point Jesus, at another point Buddha, and in this contemporary era we say Sri Ramakrishna, but that's secondary. The religions, the institutions, the rules, the rituals, even the mythologies, these are all secondary. Churches, books, dogmas, this is but the kindergarten of religion. It's not that we don't go to kindergarten, it's just, it's nice to like grow up. I guess it's good to be born in a church, it's terrible to die there. So religion cannot be the end goal. If it's a means, good. It can be a very good means. It can be a yoga. There's some use for it. But it's important, though, that Swami Vivekananda was not here to form a religion or a sect. He was not here to champion any person. He was here to champion a trans-cultural, trans-mythological, trans-psychological reality. And in a figure so personal as Swamiji, you felt this impersonal touch, which we call Shakti. In one private conversation, Swami Vivekananda said, I think to Sister Nivedita, usually his best stuff on Kali is always said in private to his foremost disciple Nivedita. And he said something to the effect of, I am sure of it, Kali dredged up this body called Ramakrishna for her own purposes. Sri Ramakrishna himself on Keshav Chandra Sen's boat once said to a group of people gathered, he said, this body is a pillowcase. So Sri Ramakrishna is a sock puppet, if you will. In our tradition, we often say it's like looking at a wall, and on the other side of the wall is sky-like awareness, reality, which is unconstrained by form, uncircumscribed by concept, beyond the field of words and thought. That reality is hidden, as it were, by a wall. Sri Ramakrishna, as well as Jesus, as well as Buddha, as well as your own Guru, these are like openings in the wall, as it were. So there's a Ramakrishna-shaped opening, and the important thing is not the shape of the opening. The important thing is that you put your eye against that keyhole and look out at sky-like awareness. That's the way that these figures in historicity meet us halfway. Because we cannot understand God, God becomes man, as it were. If horses had avatars, they would be horses. Swamiji illustrates this idea, and of course old Greek philosophers would also, I think, was it Democritus? There was a Greek philosopher who might have been the first person in the Western tradition to say, if horses had gods, they would be horses. But that isn't to discount the presence of gods or avatars. It's just to say that in God's mercy, vitaritum avatiranam jnana bhakti prashanti pranaya galita chittam jiva dukkha seshnam virita sahaja samadhim chinmayam komalangam vimala paramahamsam Ramakrishnam bhajamaha. That in God's glory, in God's benevolence, she takes the form of a Ramakrishna, if you will. And through that form, one glances the personal, impersonal, transcendent, immanent, sky-like nature of awareness, which you yourself are. So to meet yourself, you look at Ramakrishna. And what he is a hole in the wall, if you will, or better yet, a mirror. I think that's why everyone in the world responds in a certain way to Jesus. Not because they necessarily look upon him as like a religious leader or anything, or like the rabbi par excellence, but because he shows them what they themselves could be. A figure of unconditional love and absolute, reckless, ecstatic freedom. So when we look at Sri Ramakrishna, we see that freedom. And it's our own freedom reflected back at us. Or it's like a hole in the wall. So when Swami Vivekananda in this country preached Ramakrishna, he kept the name off of his lips. Except for a few occasions. There was a great, I think, Madison Square Garden lecture that he gave called My Master, where he specifically addresses his relationship to Sri Ramakrishna and what he learned from Sri Ramakrishna, and he gives more or less a biography of Sri Ramakrishna. But you can see that even in that lecture called My Master, which has since been published as like an independent little pamphlet, even there, he's so abstract and impersonal and general about it. Because clearly he's not interested in talking about the man, although his whole life is given to the man. He's more interested in talking about the message. Having said that, I think it's important to remember that Swami Nikhilananda was the president of the Vivekananda Ramakrishna, like what's called the Vedanta Center of Vedanta Society of New York. Now, the Vedanta Society of New York, this is really, really important, was the first thing that Swami Vivekananda founded as an organizational body. Remember, he was very reluctant to do this, lest he make Ramakrishna into a sect, lest he turn spirituality into religion, lest he bind the reckless freedom that was Sri Ramakrishna into the narrow confines of institutional walls. Like he even remarked one time to one of his brother disciples, was our master's message so small that it is to be confined in a shrine room? He warned us not to turn Sri Ramakrishna into Thakur Bhari, which means a temple of Sri Ramakrishna, because then it would only serve its role in a religious context, which, considering the broad scheme of things, considering humanity at large, is such a small part of our experience as being human. Like architecture is just as important. Poetry and art and music, these things are just as valid means for realizing God as religion. What about science? Like there are entire fields of human endeavor that have nothing to do with religion. And so to say Sri Ramakrishna is a religious figure, I think does him a tremendous disservice, a disservice that Swami Vivekananda would never commit. And therefore, he kept the name Ramakrishna off his lips, and therefore he dragged his feet at every step in founding an organization. And after, it's kind of interesting, he gave this like retreat in Thousand Islands Park, and there was no more than 12 students present at any given time. Like 12 altogether showed up and lived in close quarters with the Swami, and morning and evening they would have lectures and they would go on picnics and hang out and whatnot, but no more than 12 would be gathered, and never at the same time. So this is like a small group to whom Swami Vivekananda arguably gave his best. He even said in one letter that Thousand Islands Park was his best work. And Swami Nikhilanandaji put a beautiful book out called Inspired Talks. It's like volume 6 or 7 of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, but these are just like collected little excerpts that Miss Waldo Emerson, who of course is a relative of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great transcendentalist, she like just took these notes of Swami Vivekananda, and she was so good at note-taking that Swamiji himself once remarked that it's almost like I hear myself talking when I read your notes. So based on these notes, a book was compiled of what Swamiji had to say at Thousand Islands Park, but it's only like the tip of the iceberg. Who knew what he really talked about? And what little glimpses that we get show us a very inspired Swami Vivekananda. So after this whole like adventure in Thousand Islands Park, like in June or July or something, in 1895 or 1896 or something like that. He said in a letter, he said, "Each is free to teach after his own fashion. We want no organization." It was a triumphant declaration of freedom. Because you have to remember, like right before he gave his retreat at Thousand Islands Park, Swami Vivekananda had this experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi at, what was the name of the camp? Camp Percy? Camp Taylor is on the west coast, right? I keep forgetting which white person's name is which camp, but Camp Percy, I think. It's upstate New York, and he was like just resting. His friends had invited him to come and like just rest at their retreat, at their kind of summer home or something. So the gardener allegedly found him and ran back to the house and said Swami Vivekananda is dead, because he was there like sitting in deep samadhi, showing no signs of life. And then everyone comes and, you know, of course he comes back to life, as it were. And so we all know, based on this record, that he had this experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi there at that camp. Shortly after, he would give this retreat at Thousand Islands Park. And we know that he was like a lion let loose from its cage, roaring with all the ferocity of liberation and freedom. So he would pace back and forth like a lion and say, "Azad, Azad, the free, the free." And his only message was a message of freedom. In fact, his masterpiece, we consider it to be the Song of the Sannyasin. And he wrote that poem there at Thousand Islands Park. So we can see that he's in a very inspired state. He's identified with sky-like awareness beyond all cultural construct, beyond all psychological form even. And so you notice that at the end of this adventure, he's not interested in an organization. How could he be? An organization would be form. It would be too constricting for a sky-like free presence like Vivekananda, like Ramakrishna. So that's why he said in that letter, quite tellingly, we have no organization nor want any. Each is free to teach after his own fashion. So his goal was just to like inspire people, just to turn individuals into masters, and then to say, okay, now go and do whatever. Like teach after your own fashion, based on your own interpretation. Each of you are each of you will have something to say that will be valid in the overall understanding of Sri Ramakrishna. And necessarily what each of you will have to say will be different, owing to the different predispositions of all of those disciples gathered. And they were, of course, a small group, a handful of disciples that Swamiji felt were ready to go really deep with him, you know. So he didn't want an organization. He just wanted to train individuals. He just wanted to free individuals. And he knew that free people free people. So all he had to do was demonstrate the way and transmit through religious contagion the way, and those people to whom it had been transmitted would then go out and like a forest fire in a sandalwood forest, they would spread their fragrant and destructive message of freedom. Because no institution can stand in the face of such freedom. That's why the Christ in Mark pointed to a church or a synagogue and he said, not even one stone will be left upon that building. You know, no form, no construct, whether mental or physical, can withstand the flood of freedom that is this fire. So why would you need an organization? Why would you need a board of directors? Why would you have to collect funds? And most importantly, if you collected funds, then you would, you know, subject yourself to all sorts of weird things like pandering after donors. You know, like you would have to pander to donors, and you would have to like maybe be politically correct or something. You would have to do things that ensure that you kept getting funding, and you have to avoid doing things that would like cut off your funding. But then that changes the whole metric as to how you give your message, because, you know, to try to be politically correct, that's something that's going to change with the time. But the truth is not necessarily something that changes with the time, and the truth is not something that will necessarily comfort us at different times of our cultural evolution. Maybe it disturbs the comforted and comforts the disturbed or something like that. So how could you have your freedom to give your message after your own fashion? How could you be an individual? How can you be authentic? How can you speak your truth when there are considerations like donors and a board of directors and money, and most importantly hierarchies where some people are the boss and some people are not, and then who gets to say what and when? These are all things that get introduced into the mix once you start up an organization. So necessarily, like Swamiji said to his brother disciple, is Ramakrishna's message so small that he can be confined to a shrine room? In other words, is this something so cheap that it's only religiously valuable and not architecturally or poetically valuable? Is this something that you can't express in terms of science or in terms of physics or math? Obviously not. If Sri Ramakrishna is the avatara, his influence cannot be confined to only religion. Just like the Christ's influence was not confined to merely religion. It's something that takes civilizational proportions that encapsulates all human endeavor. And so necessarily, how could Swamiji, a personality so vast and free, how could he be the founder of any church or sect or religion? How could he champion the message of any man, as if this message was historically, geographically, culturally conditioned. And so we get that letter. We have no organization, nor do we want any. And then shortly after that, he kind of caved. This is interesting. That's one of my favorite things about Swami Vivekananda's personality, the tension within him when it came to founding the Ramakrishna Math Mission. And way before that, founding the Vedanta Society of New York. And this is important to me because before the global international organization called the Ramakrishna Math was founded, the Vivekananda Ramakrishna Center, or more importantly, as it's called, the Vedanta Society of New York, that was founded first. So the Swamiji's first organization in the world, his first organizational contribution along these lines was in New York. It was in America that arguably the spiritual revolution wasn't. I mean, you can't say it was started in America. You could argue it was started in 1893 when he gave that lecture at the Parliament of World Religions. But arguably it was started in like 1836, the moment this little kid rolled out of the womb and rolled in the ashes of the hearth and sat there like Shiva, covered in the ashes of the world that he would soon burn down. This is very interesting. When exactly this revolution began, nobody knows. We didn't start the fire. It was always burning since the world was turning. The same message of the Christ, the same message of the Buddha, and the same message of the nameless rishis before them. Who can say where that started? Swamiji, in the beginning of Song of the Sannyasin, addresses it. You know, there's like some mountain somewhere, like the Himalayas, from which this message flows. Like a radio station broadcasting a frequency. One of my favorite movies of all time is Pirate Radio. Some of you have seen it. And it's just a group of British radio DJs on a boat illegally streaming rock music at a time when the British government was trying to like clamp down on it. Because it was the sound of the revolution. It was the sound of young people not accepting the stifling structures that were being imposed upon them by their elders. When young people were able to say, I don't need to accept this, that's when real change was possible. And it's through music that that revolution, the call to that revolution was sounded. No one has more influence in this world than musicians, after all. So given that, and Sri Ramakrishna, as you know, his relationship to music and theater and art is a well-documented fact. But, you know, in that movie, it's beautiful because these radio DJs, based on a true story, by the way, these radio DJs were willing to give their lives for the effort of just broadcasting rock music. The Beatles, Turtles, the Kinks, the Kooks, like stuff like that. 60s, early 70s, late 60s kind of rock music. So I love that movie. I love it to death. There's a great scene towards the end. I'm sorry to spoil it, but the ship sinks, obviously. In this great, like 300-esque, Leonidas leads his small battalion against a huge army, like in this kind of epic closing scene. There's a DJ who is very lonely and very private. He does like the late night show, like the early morning show or something. And he has all of these records, and the ship starts to flood. And he realizes that all of his records are going to be like destroyed. So risking life and limb, he plunges back into the water, swims to the bottom of the ship, and tries to save what records he can. Because that's what the music means to him. The music is so valuable to him that he's willing to give his life for it. And that's what they were willing to do and what they almost did, if not for the fans who came out in boats to save them, because that boat was sinking, you know. And so it's a remarkable story of like human resistance. And when that started, nobody knows. It's just always been there. Christianity began as that, a resistance movement against cultural forms that no longer served people, deadened forms, constructs. And how do things become deadened? How do they become constrained? By their institutionalization, by their organization. Because then the protocol, the hierarchies, the dogma becomes the point, when it was really just meant to support something far deeper, far richer, and transpersonal, transcultural, and transpsychological. So you can see, like, given that this is the course of history, Swami Vivekananda did not want to found a Constantine-like church in the name of the Christ that we call Ramakrishna. It's a very important thing. He was dragging his feet doing this, you know. But anyway, you could say like this movement, if it is indeed a movement, has no real beginning and it will have no real end. It's part of Ma Kali's play. But in a sense, organizationally, institutionally, it was founded in New York in 1896. So it wasn't at that time an international movement like it is now. It didn't have civilizational proportions encapsulating all of human endeavors as it does now. At that time, it was really no more than a WhatsApp group. That's what really inspires me about all of this. Swami Vivekananda would give lectures in public places, sometimes in private gatherings. He would be invited by someone to like speak in the living room, and that person would invite their friends, and everyone would sit around, and Swamiji would just like hang out and talk and give formal and informal lectures. He would take questions, there'd be Q&As, like that kind of thing. And then there were a group of people who were interested, who were really moved by what the Swami had to say, like Sister Nivedita, for instance, who, when she first, as Margaret Noble, heard him in London, we talked about this some weeks ago, she wasn't that impressed. In fact, she thought everything that he had to say was not new. She had heard it before. But when she started attending his public lectures, especially those 3 lectures he gave on Maya in October of 1896 in London, she realized that there was something here, something profound, and it was worth chasing to the ends of the earth. And that's what they did. Some of these Londoners who heard this message, they followed Swamiji to the UK. And just 2 people, Mr. and Mrs. Xavier, the Captain Xavier and his wife, the 2 of them just like founded Mayavati Ashrama. And so this whole like situation that's going on in Gangotri right now, that was just 2 people. Or like Sister Nivedita, 1 single person, she has a bridge named after her in Kolkata because the amount of things that flowed from her is like unbelievable. How much Shakti this one individual had. It's almost like this, like you don't need a cultural like shift in order to start the revolution. You just need 12 people in a room, 12 people in a retreat center. In fact, we could do a lot more with 4 strong people. Just give us 3. Just give us 2. Heck, just give us 1. Give us 1 Vivekananda, and we can shake every institution to its very roots. Give us 1 Jesus, and we can point to that building and say, not even 1 stone will be left standing. So in what sense is Peter the cornerstone? It cannot be a physical structure. It cannot be an earthly organization that the Christ is referring to when he talks about Peter as the cornerstone. It is a spiritual edifice that we are building. And the thing about spiritual edifices is that they're always built outdoors. The sky thy roof, the grass thy bed, food what chance may bring. For freedom cannot be constrained into the narrow confines of the organizational, institutional walls. So having said that, you can see that Swami Vivekananda didn't want to start an organization. All he had really was a group of enthusiasts, like a group of people who were resonating with his message, who wanted to like support that message, or at least in their enthusiasm and fervor, share that message in order to like free others or like remind others of their inherent freedom. I mean, it's like if you have something really nice, how can you keep it all to yourself? There are some people who, when they get a mango, the first thing that they do is they call all their friends into the room to share the mango. Because the joy of sharing a mango is so much better than the joy of eating a mango all by yourself. And we know this. It's nice to like drink with friends and smoke with friends. When you're partying, it's nice to party with other people. Even if you're like super, super, super introverted and you hate people, like even then you might have 1 or 2 friends who share your hatred for people, and then you get together with your fellow people haters, and then you form your antisocial social club or something. You just hang out. It's always better together. Misery loves company, and so too does joy. And so we love sharing. And so if you find something that you love, like look at Instagram, like you find, I mean, some of you, I'm sorry because I keep DMing you, I keep spamming you with like every funny thing that I find on Instagram. Some of you get this more than others, but I just will like share and share and share anything that even mildly reminds me of my life and your life, you know? So like we just have this impulse. When we see something on the internet that we love, we want to share it. When we hear an idea that we love, we want to teach it. Like that's just the basic inherent nature of enthusiasm. You can't contain it. If you become enthusiastic, or to use the word in the Greek sense, filled with God, God here being no particular deity or prophet or book, but God here being that energy of enlivenment itself, when you become filled with that, what are you going to do? You're going to write music, you know, and you're going to like paint a painting. You're going to come up with a poem or think of some new mathematical equation, and then you're going to share that. Just like a flower blooms and emits fragrance unthinkingly, so too does the human, enthused by God, if you will, just bloom and share, and all the bees come to collect that honey. So it's inevitable that anybody who is fired up by an idea, that person will become an evangelist for that idea. And this is the most wonderful idea to be evangelized, because it's not any particular sect or creed or person or tradition. It's that evangelism that includes all, that supports all, that excludes and negates none. It's a remarkable thing. So having said that, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna's first evangel, like Paul is to the Christ, he's just interested in sharing these ideas, and the people who heard these ideas were so interested in propagating them, or at least talking about them. So when Swamiji would go to London, the people in New York would be like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Our fearless leader, our teacher, our guru has gone to London, and so he won't be here giving lectures anymore? Now what? Are we just going to like go home and forget this ever happened? One of my favorite things about that movie Pirate Radio is when the movie ends, There's this wonderful celebration of how rock and roll survived British colonial tyranny. And then the end of the movie is just records. Like the screen is just one by one, records are being displayed of all the great music that has come about since that resistance movement. So since the 1967, 1968, like pirate radio craze, like since then, look what happened. Just because a group of people, maybe no more than 12, were willing to give their lives up for a music that they believed in. How is this any less noble than Leonidas' stand against an army far beyond his ability to protect himself from? Like, how is this any different from the religious instinct or the martial instinct? Like, we see the same demonstrations of human spirit in all the realms of human endeavor. And so, it's nice to think how much has come from just that single impulse to share. So you can imagine when those guys gave their lives, those guys and girls and people gave their lives for rock music, from that point on, the fire that they kept alive, I have my Vesta and Scorpio, so, for astrologers in the room, that's why I am the way that I am. But that sacred flame that they kept alive, look how it spread like a forest fire through a sandalwood forest, and what fragrance it is. To us, it is fragrance. To the powers that be, it is not the red glow of a newly rising sun, but the red glow of an apocalyptic nuclear winter. Because make no mistake, we who practice religion, we are a swarm of locusts, come to descend upon the structures that no longer serve us. We are in fact a cultural revolution, and the powers that be ought fear us. For once we discover that we are the power in our being, our very being is the powers that be must cave. They must cave to that, as they always have. The entire Roman civilization collapsed because of one dusty beggar with a message. The entire tyranny of consumer capitalism buckles under the weight of one person with a guitar. Look out, honey, because I'm using technology. Ain't got time for no apology. Because I'm the world's forgotten boy. I'm the one who's searching to destroy. So, that being said, notice Vivekananda had a message. And he even said, as the Buddha had a message for the East, I have a message for the West. But I would even argue the Buddha's message is exactly Vivekananda's message. It's a message for the world, a message that would shake the world to its very roots. Now, he gave that message after his own fashion, with no apology and no organization. And the ones who heard that message wanted to do the same. But when he went to London, the need was felt for some kind of structure, some kind of collective, if you will. So really, it was no more than a WhatsApp group. That's what's really inspiring to me. Because what Mahadev and gang are doing in Seattle, it will change the course of history. It's a WhatsApp group. It's a group of people who get together, but it's a group of people who have heard the message, in whom the message is alive, and from whom the message will flow forth to shake the very roots of the earth. Give us 12 strong people who will change the world. And so that's what happened to us. We read Swamiji, we felt his fire, and we were inflamed. And from that point on, we became restless. And we are pacing back and forth like lions, declaring from the rooftops with a voice of thunder, I am free and so are you, for freedom alone is, and everything else is but a cloud that comes and goes in the sky-like luminosity of my being. What religion can hold me? What ritual can express me? What rules or regulation can regulate me? And what organization, what institution can police me? Who can say what I can say and what I cannot say? I will give my message after my own fashion, and watch out, honey, I'm using technology. I ain't got time for no apology. This was the message that Swamiji, the fire that Swamiji lit. So when he was in London, they would get together. That was it. That was the inception of the Vivekananda Ramakrishna centers of New York. There are two of them, actually, Abhedananda Center and Vivekananda Center, which is, to me, really cool. That two direct disciples have two centers, separate centers, both representing the same guy. Because that guy, Ramakrishna, was so vast that Aurobindo can have his own thing, Abhedananda can have his own thing, Vivekananda can have his own thing, and no one thing can hegemonize or monopolize the message. Because it's a message that's too vast, too slippery to be confined into dogma or creed. So Swamiji, when he went to London, the disciples that he left over in New York just independently got together, and then eventually, Miss Emerson, she started giving lectures. Like Swamiji gave her a spiritual name, and then she went on to give lectures. Sister Deva Mata, she's a very important figure. She met Swami Vivekananda. She's a disciple of one of Swamiji's disciples, Swami Paramananda. So Swami Paramananda initiates Deva Mata. Deva Mata met Vivekananda, and Deva Mata went on to be a very powerful teacher. So a lot of these were women. That's another thing that's really interesting to me. The levers of Swamiji's activity in the world were really just these powerful women. Sister Nivedita, Mrs. Xavier, So many women, too many to name in this one moment. It was really women that forwarded this movement. And of course, it had to be women because this is a Shakta movement. Shakta in the sense that it's about power, it's about life, it's about expression. And we see that in art, in architecture, in science, in math, etc. So if it's a Shakta movement whose central figure, whether known or unknown, is Kali, the goddess, then it's women, the incarnations of that goddess, who will move this message along. That's why we think of Sri Ramakrishna as a mother, as a woman. And that's why we tend to speak of Sarada Devi in even more reverent tones. Because what he was but a pillowcase. What flowed through him is what we call Sarada Devi, it's what we call Kali. So it was important to me that women were the ones who got together in New York and who started teaching and spreading this message. And necessarily then the community grew. And then people were like, oh, we want to support this, but we don't know how. And we have time and we have energy, but we also have funds. Like, what do we do with them? And so there was a need for organization. So this man, Swami Vivekananda, who was so reluctant to start an organization, he eventually went ahead and just kind of did. I think I love that tension within him, because the tension that we feel even now, because I will say what I want to say about Sri Ramakrishna, and those who are within the institution and organization, some, not all, obviously it's a very liberal organization, but there are some within that organization who will have a problem with it because I am not of the organization. You see the problem? Like, once you have an organization, you exclude. And once you start to exclude, you start to monopolize and hegemonize the narrative. And once you do that, you rob it of its like Shakta flexibility, of its life force. And it becomes but a dogma, but a creed, but a church, but a book, which are nothing but the kindergarten of religion, the secondary details, if you will. So Swamiji didn't want to start an organization. Eventually an organization started anyway. And so we find this tension already. So it's important to me that in America, in New York, in 1896, the beginnings of what would be the worldwide international organization known as the Ramakrishna Math Mission was founded. It's on home turf, as it were, for all the Americans in the room that this happened. So it's particularly exciting to address Americans, because this was Swamiji's first audience and arguably his first helpers in the cause. And some would even argue his truest helpers, because it took a long time for those back home in India to get what he was trying to say, since they were constrained by religious forces. You know, they had a very arguably culturally conditioned response to Sri Ramakrishna. And what Swami Vivekananda is trying to do is so transcultural that it found most resistance among those who were culturally conditioned. So the home of the prophet is never usually where the prophet makes headway. It's usually in some other culture, speaking in front of another group of people who are not so culturally conditioned that they can hear the true gist of the message. Ramakrishna's message has nothing to do with Hinduism. And that's why boldly I declare I am not a Hindu. What religion can hold me? And I boldly declare that I'm not an Indian, nor am I American. Actually, I'm actually not American. So if somebody can hook me up with that green card, that would be good. But like if it's my marriage proposal, okay? I'm a passenger princess, but I have a great taste in music, and I know how to party. So it's a good deal. I'm kidding. So I don't have any cows to give in dowry, but you know, I have a few playlists or two I could send over. So, where was that? Before my bad marriage joke. Vivekananda. So notice, this is so important to me that like it was in this country that people actually understood what he was saying. And then when he went back to India, he faced great resistance saying it to his people, to people that he grew up with, to his brother disciples even. He had great difficulty conveying what he felt was true and universal and good in Ramakrishna, which is but one of many narratives, each of them equally valid. So having said all of that, the Vivekananda mission, as it were, which is the Ramakrishna mission, which is really Kali's presence in the Kali Yuga, it began in New York in 1896. Anyway, Swamiji goes to London. He found some stuff up in London too. Swami Abhedananda comes over, Swami Sahadananda comes over, and they're all doing this work, right? Anyway, Swamiji goes back to India. And that's a wonderful story of how he lectures in Madras, and from Madras up to Almora, he gives a series of stunning lectures. Some of my favorite things that he's ever said come from this period when he's addressing Indians. I, as an Indian, feel particularly called out by a lot of what he has to say. He points to the failures in our religion often. He's hard on us, as you can see from these lectures. And he rouses a fire. It's just a wonderful thing. Anyway, so then he goes back to Bengal. And they're just trying to figure out what to do now. Swamiji triumphs in the West. His message is now universally accepted, where once it was resisted from every corner. Now what? And again, the same need for organization was felt. Just like in New York, there was this need to get together and perpetuate the teachings just out of a shared enthusiasm for them. Just like that in India too, especially in Kolkata, Sri Ramakrishna's birthplace, and not he wasn't born in Kolkata, but in Bengal, Sri Ramakrishna's Gurustan, if you will, the place where he was born. above all was felt this desire to organize. And so finally, on May 1st, in 1897, they organized. They established the Ramakrishna Math. And there's so much leela to this that's worth talking about. Like, for example, when they wrote rules, Swami Brahmananda, who was the first president of the order, they showed him the rules, and allegedly he tore them up. Without saying a word, he read over them and quietly tore them up. And Swamiji was like, okay, got it. Right? Like, there are all these wonderful leelas. Or like, they would try to have board meetings, and it would be really difficult because Swami Brahmananda was almost always checked out. He was fishing or smoking his hookah or literally playing cards. He was very fond of playing cards. And so he wasn't really the president that people wanted him to be. It would take him forever to sign a piece of paper. There's a wonderful leela where he's like about to sign a piece of paper and he just like stares at the paper, holding the pen for like a long period of time. And the disciple, with great reservation, with great timidity, you can imagine, right? Like, this is my guru or this is the president. Like, it's kind of hard to speak to your elders in an Indian context. But this disciple said, Maharaj, like, can you sign it? Because we need your signature so we can continue with the work. We're kind of, short on time here. It's like a famine, there's a flood, like, sign the paper. And Swami Brahmananda, the first president of this Ramakrishna Math, he like looked up and he just said something like, I can't remember my name. Anyway, so there's like, they would try to have board meetings. And board meetings are kind of boring. And men of God, women of God, people of God are anything but. So it's very hard to get them into a board meeting, into a boardroom, to talk about practical things like time and whatnot, right? So it was historically difficult, legendarily difficult to organize a board meeting. There's this wonderful story of one of the annual grand meetings or whatever, where Swami Premananda wasn't present. And they were like, look, we can't have this meeting without the general manager of the Ramakrishna Math Mission, without the Belur Math manager. We can't do this meeting without him. So can somebody go upstairs and get him? So I think it was Swami Niranjanananda, I believe, who went upstairs to get Swami Premananda. Swami Premananda, Baburam Maharaj, is in this moment absorbed in deep samadhi. He's meditating and he's lost in the bliss of his being. And you know what happens? Swami Niranjanananda, who is a wrestler, big and strong guy, he picks Baburam Maharaj up. I kid you not. Like, the story is he literally scoops him up off the floor and carries him down the stairs. The whole time Baburam Maharaj is absorbed in samadhi. And when they get to the bottom of the stairs and they get to the boardroom, Baburam wakes up. And here's the thing. When you come out of samadhi, arguably, the impression of samadhi is left over and it spills into your experience of physicality. So now you don't see a world anymore. Post-samadhi, you see a world transformed. It's God shining forth in all things as all things. And what do you do when you're face to face with God? There's only one thing to do, honestly. To sing and dance the ecstatic dance of no hope. The mad dance of ruin and ecstasy. So when faced with this reality, post-samadhi, Baburam Maharaj, Swami Premananda can't help but jump, dance and sing. So he literally wakes up, leaps out of Swami Niranjanananda's grasp and starts dancing and singing. At which point all the other brother disciples catch the spiritual contagion of that, and they too start to dance and sing, and the whole annual grand meeting dissolves. It breaks down. It collapses into an ecstatic kirtan. And that was a more productive meeting for the world than just like deciding on the schedule and the activities and the calendar and whatnot. You see, so that's the Ramakrishna Math Mission. If you really want to understand this institution that outwardly looks so sober and so efficient and so like mechanical, like you have to understand that its inner court is peopled by God-intoxicated maddened mystics. This is a very important point. The maddened mystics of Ramakrishna. It's like impossible to conceive of an organization founded by such people like this. And yet Kali is full of contradictions. She's full of paradoxes. And so the greatest paradox of our time is that Ramakrishna, that Vivekananda, too vast for an institution, became institutionalized. And what a grand institution it is, isn't it? Anyways, there's so much leela, so many stories and anecdotes around the founding of this organization. But in any case, I thought today it would be fun just to read to you a little bit from Vivekananda, The Life of Vivekananda by his Eastern and Western Disciples, Volume 2, because there's like a little excerpt in there about the founding of the Ramakrishna Math Mission. So today is May 4th. I thought maybe I could give a lecture on Star Wars, talk a little bit about Joseph Campbell, and talk about how he was a disciple of Swami Nihilism, the president of the Vivekananda established Vedanta Society of New York, and talk a little bit about how Nihilism is the disciple of Holy Mother. So it's through Holy Mother Sarada Devi that you get Nihilism. It's through Nihilism that you get Campbell, and it's through Campbell speaking entirely in mythological terms without ever referencing Ramakrishna that you feel the Ramakrishnan influence in the academic and pop culture sense. It's through, I would argue, Freud and his relationship to people like, it's crazy, the oceanic feeling that Freud talks about. It's in reference to Ramakrishna. It's crazy to what extent these intellectuals that are like household names now, to what extent they were involved in this whole Ramakrishna thing. Right? So the oceanic feeling that Freud talks about, the religious feeling, that's in reference to Ramakrishna's samadhis. So anyway, like Romain Rolland, his relationship to Freud, like you can see how Freud and Jung are very influenced by Ramakrishna, not to say anything about Max Mueller and any of that. But you know, when you consider all these people, notice they don't need to talk about Ramakrishna to talk about Ramakrishna. They don't need to reference a man or even a religious tradition to be able to express the idea of that. Because you'll recall that Ramakrishna's central idea is that there is God. There's an absolute truth. But unlike what religions tell you, that truth cannot be confined to any one prophet, any one book, or any one conception. It's so great and so benevolent as to include them all, rejecting none, excluding none. So that absolute, which is the one through which, through any path that, which you can attain through any path, each suited to different people of different dispositions, that was Ramakrishna's, arguably his central message, the harmony of all religions, etc., etc. A message that is so important for our postmodern, post-truth, relativist, globalized world. It's a message that could save lives, actually. And not just in the sense of averting wars. Obviously, that's not what I mean. I'm all for destruction. But I mean, like, in a deeper sense, it saves lives in the sense that it saves you from the drying up within. Do you know? There are just wars. But those are secondary and peripheral. The real war that we often fight and lose is the war within. And that's what Sri Ramakrishna comes to, the Kurukshetra that Sri Ramakrishna came to fight on, is that one in which we like fall into a nihilistic despair because of all these contrary truth claims. He's here to show that they all can be equally true, but they don't all have to be true for you. And whatever is true for you is only instrumentally true. It's only a yoga. It's just something that you use in order to realize something even deeper, that what you are is inalienably, extrinsically pure, free, and powerful. So even these things are not even that useful. But if we have to use them, let's use them and not worship them. In other words, if you are to climb a ladder, climb the damn thing and get to the roof. Don't worship the ladder. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna comes to move us beyond religion. That's why what I think we're doing here is not religious. Somebody asked me to file for a 501c3 so I can be a tax-exempt religious institution. We meet a lot of the requirements in this country for that. But I'm like, oh, God forbid, lest we think of ourselves as a religion. The last thing I want to be is a church. I'm free, I'm drunk, and I'm just talking on the internet. What of it? We want no organization. Speaking of which, can I have some of that framboisie?
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
I can open it.
Oh, there's a bottle opener over there.
I know
Anyway.
there's a bottle opener. I couldn't figure it out.
There's maybe a mantra. We didn't have the Adhikari yesterday because we were watching the 1977 Suspiria. And I think we had to be incredibly sober to truly appreciate the experience of 1977 Italian Suspiria. Anyway, so, yeah, so what are we? We're just drunk, we're on the internet, and we're just talking. But, see? Today we have the Adhikari. It was for now. But this is really, really important to me, that like if we consider ourselves a religious movement or even an artistic movement, then we are confining ourselves to something that is actually so vast that it can include the entire spectrum of human endeavor, the entire civilizational project, which knows no geographical or cultural bounds. That's exciting to me. So anyway, coming to this idea of the Ramakrishna Math Mission, there was indeed an organization founded to try to contain that which is so vast that it cannot be organized. And I think, Jaima, thank you, dear. Can you pour some on the yantra? On that yantra. Yeah, just pour it right on it. So like, this is such an important idea to me that like, we now have, oh, by the way, here's Sai. Shunya is here. There's Mahadev is there too, and Jwalamukhi Devi, and I was thinking I'm just gonna like move to Seattle.
I miss you guys.
At least spend a month or two in Seattle.
It's
Like-
Seattle summer.
Seattle summer, Seattle summer. Okay,
summer.
yeah, I'm gonna crash out in Seattle. We'll have a hot girl
Yay!
crash out in Seattle together.
Okay, bet.
Seattle summer. Fuck yeah.
I miss you, ding dongs.
Love you so much. I'm in Texas. This is my best friend in the entire world from grade school. The person I've known longer than anyone but my mother. She might as well. I love her so much. Hi, I love you too.
Did they finish the Dhuni?
Yeah.
Mahadev said yes. They just used it today. How wonderful.
Just need the roof. Oh,
Fuck yeah.
my god.
Just 4 people in the corner of the Pacific Northwest is all you need to change the world.
Oh,
So,
my god.
then to sculpt Ma. Goddamn. Look at this. So this is so important that like we have an organization, and I think in talking to you about the founding of that organization, a lot can be learned, a lot can be revealed. So what I want to do now is I want to read to you from the Life of Swami Vivekananda by his Eastern and Western Disciples, Volume 2. I want to read the excerpt about the founding of the Ramakrishna Math, which happened on May 1st. So although this could very well have been a May 4th Star Wars themed lecture, there was another event that happened on May 1st, which is the founding of the Math, of the institution. Now I am not formally of the Math. Like I'm not a monk in the Ramakrishna Math, although I'm a part of the Ramakrishna Mission, as are you all. So this is a very important point. Like I cannot represent the Ramakrishna Math since I'm not a monk involved in that institution. And yet I would live and die to defend it, if that makes sense. Like although I am not of the institution, that institution is such an important part of a wider mission, a wider movement, which we just call the Ramakrishna movement, which anybody anywhere, including Campbell, including Einstein, including Frank Lloyd Wright, I would even argue, including Jung and including Freud, anyone, anywhere. What is that, Ma? A Rudraksh?
I asked for a simple little bit of weed, and instead, someone showed up and was like, "Here's this weed
She was gifted.
dipped in resin and coated in kefir." I was like, "I would just like to smoke a joint. Instead, I'm going to take a trip to Uranus, apparently, through fucking outer space."
It never rains,
So-
but it pours.
What the hell?
Jaima, I said,
Jaima.
"Can I just get a little weed?" He's like, "It's dipped and coated in resin and coated in kefir on top of that."
I'm
Anyway,
gonna explain. He
Just gonna-
showed up with his best offering.
Yeah, as he should when he's coming to the altar of the Divine Mother. May they all only bring their best. Jaima,
I
Jaima,
told my
Jaima.
friend I'm gonna log into the spiritual lecture real quick, drunk, and it's fine. And the first thing you said was that you were drunk and talking on the internet. I was like, "That's my good."
Right? I'm sorry. The rules and regulations that apply to certain people don't apply to
It
me.
was like
Sorry.
the perfect timing. I loved it. It's the first thing.
Yeah.
We're listening now.
No, we should be listening, Ma, honestly. One of my favorite Marilyn Manson quotes of all time, a big fan, obviously. Somebody asked him, what would you say to the Columbine shooters? Right? Like they asked him, like, what would you say if they were here right now? What would you say to them? Without missing a beat, Marilyn Manson said, I wouldn't say a word to them. I would listen to what they have to say, which is what nobody ever did. Right? Anyway. So, Swami Vivekananda, he founds the mission, and I think there's something to be learned about this founding of the Math and mission, and it has to do with a few episodes that happened immediately after the mission was the Math was established. And it has to do with people in Swamiji's immediate community, especially his brother disciples, not getting it. They just like didn't understand the Ramakrishna that Vivekananda was presenting, because to them, culturally conditioned as they were, it was a Ramakrishna unlike the one that they had built up in their minds. Like they saw him as this religious teacher. Swamiji saw him as much, much more. Yes, and so when he presents Ramakrishna in the vaster proportion that was culturally available, he necessarily, unsurprisingly, met with a lot of cultural backlash. And where that was most felt was with his brother disciples, who were next to him in boyhood as they sat at the feet of this great master. So it's like, how could, and even now, right, like how could people read the same Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which Swami Nikhilananda translated into English from the original 5-volume Bengali Katamrita, how can so many people read the same book and get very different things from it? For example, the Ramakrishna that I present is manifestly offensive to many people who are also part of the same tradition. And they're like, what book are you reading? And I'm like, I'm reading the same gospel that you guys are reading. I'm just getting a very different thing from it. And that's valid, as is your take on the gospel. Like everybody and their idea of Sri Ramakrishna is perfectly all right and perfectly fine to have that idea. It's interesting though, because if you go on the internet, you like just do one Google search, you'll see that a lot of people, their main problem with me is that I'm representing Ramakrishna in a way that people don't feel like he ought to be represented. And so I this is with a bit of pathos when I read this. I like really connect to this feeling, not to compare myself to Vivekananda in any way, shape or form, although he would want me to. But I think it's really important that, like, there are other ways to interpret Ramakrishna, and if you try to interpret him more broadly than is institutionally given, like, necessarily you'll be met with backlash. And Vivekananda arguably read him in the broadest possible way that we are now, in our limited intellect, struggling to understand. It will take centuries, if not millennia, before we can fully unpack what it is Swamiji is saying and what it is he saw in Sri Ramakrishna. It was even a struggle for him to express it, as if it was a struggle for a body like that to contain so much energy and so much power. So we're going to see Swami Vivekananda have a hot girl crash out. That's what I really love about this excerpt, because after the institution is founded, like, officially the paperwork is drafted up and they've decided that they're going to be a mutt. Like, shortly after that, this tension that Swamiji is experiencing with his brother disciples and with India and with the world at large becomes more pronounced than ever. Because now it's like a thing. It's a thing that they're trying to establish and a thing that they clearly cannot agree upon. So I'm going to read to you now from this excerpt, and it's going to give you a few stories of people disagreeing with Swamiji, and, like, it's so beautiful to me to see how he freaks the fuck out. And I'm going to say that there's something about his response towards the end of the reading when he talks about Jnana and Bhakti that will dovetail really nicely with the conversation we had Thursday night on Chinnamastaka Jayanti, or right before Buddha Purnima, about Ida and Pingala, and about why the self-decapitating act is not just about decapitating your head, but also holding that head after it's been severed from the neck. So the image of Chinnamastaka, which we showed and which we talked about in that lecture, that's important. There's a lot we can learn from that with regards to Ida and Pingala, and especially important for us in the Tantric world, where sometimes our conversations can lean too far into the Ida Nadi, where it becomes purely symbolic and imagistic and outright superstitious and fear-mongery. Or we become overly scientific, overly technical, and then we lead into this, like, Upanishadic Vedantic territory where we strip all the teachings of their magic and their symbolism and their elliptical poetical power, and instead try to reduce it to clearly defined, parsed out concepts, which deadens the whole thing. So either we're careening off into the subconscious and becoming mad in a way that's not productive spiritually, or we're careening off into the conscious and becoming mad in a way that is incredibly constricting, like unweaving the rainbow or plucking off all the petals of a flower to try to figure out what beauty is. And this is an interesting thing because there's something in between, and not in between in the sense of compromising both, but in reconciling both. That we call the Shushumna Nadi. So there's this idea of duality, a thesis and an antithesis, if you want to use Hegelian or Marxian terms here. And you take those thesis and antithesis and bring them together in a synthesis. And that synthesis can be understood psychologically, emotionally, artistically, spiritually, mystically, all of that. Like any kind of dyad can induce the triad. And the Trika, the entire Trika philosophy, is premised upon this triadic approach, which we see in the image of Chinnamastaka. So decapitation is something we talked about last week. Something we talked about last year, like in that Chinnamastaka Jayanti lecture, we, I think, talked about it most, and it was called How to Decapitate Yourself. That was literally the name of the lecture. And it was all about losing your head in the mad ecstasy of bhakti, jnana, and yoga. Then last week, when we talked about Chinnamastaka, I talked about holding your head. And now I think in this reading, which I'm going to do in just a few moments, we'll see that idea expressed, lived, and exemplified. So if you don't mind, just because May 1st is so significant, it was the founding of the Ramakrishna Math, which I will die to defend, whether or not whatever they have to say about me is beside the point. What I have to say about them is that they are important to the overall mission and movement. And while I want to destroy every institution that I lay my eyes upon, this is one institution that I would stand on, that I would defend with my very life breath, because it's the institution that attempts to keep alive the sacred flame of Sri Ramakrishna. It is there that this fire burns, and to keep that dhuni lit, it's nice to refer to texts like this, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Life of Vivekananda, volumes 1 and 2, all of that kind of literature which is poured forth from the institutionalization and organization of this message. So without any further ado, to celebrate May 1st, actually with one more piece of further ado, much ado about nothing, I want to talk about May 1st as being May Day and as being related to the maypole and Beltane and whatnot, because I was recently in New England staying in Bringy Deva's house, and Bringy and Carmen and Fabio, oh my god, they really took good care of me. Bringy's fish that he made as part of the Panchamakaras for the Chinnamastaka Puja, that I think I can say, and I know I'm very hyperbolic and I tend to exaggerate, so keeping that in mind, I think it's the best thing I've ever eaten in my life. it was just a combination of like not having had eaten for a while, but like also it being 4:30 in the morning and after a really successful puja, like it was just that fish covered in mango pickles served with a side of like a spicy like jalapeno. Like fuck, that hit. Anyway, so thank you, Brigi Deva. And anyway, one thing that we got to do is we got to dance around the Maypole, the original strip club. And it's important because like this to me is like such a beautiful thing that somehow even in Christianized America, where people are mostly secular and atheistic, I mean even the Christianity of America is some kind of weird prosperity gospel Protestantism anyway for the most part. Like even in this country where weird religions come and go like mushrooms after a storm, where religions become consumer capitalist institutions, even in this country, that tradition, the Beltane tradition, the May Day tradition of dancing in circles with ribbons and strips of color around a central pole, that's maintained. And all over New England, you see maypoles one after another being constructed, and children, mostly women, little girls dancing around that maypole. I mean, what a symbol, right? It's a symbol of spring. It's a symbol of dispelling the winter and gloom that came before and heralding something new, something fresh. I love the image of Islam, which is a crescent moon, because Islam is a new religion. The idea is that the crescent moon is something that will wax and wax and wax and become more and more effulgent as the years go by. I truly believe this about Islam. I think one day we'll realize how great it is. And now the beauty of Islam is unfortunately sometimes made murky with like, you know, extremist groups and groups that don't at all represent Islam as a tradition, but come to be associated with it as a tradition. So like having said that, like Ramakrishna has often been called the 3-day waxing moon. Today is Tritiya. Of course, it's the 3-day waning moon today. But Tritiya was the day that Sri Ramakrishna was born, 3 days after the new moon of Shiva. And so we call Sri Ramakrishna the crescent moon. He's only waxing. And by Ramakrishna, I don't at all mean the man. God forbid. I confine the power and poetry of this message to Thakurbari, to a shrine room. God forbid the only lectures I give are from within the institution. Those of you who came to Atlanta, like Sonuma and others, like the best times I had there. I had a great time in the lecture hall. Like that was fun. We gave so many lectures, and our lectures were 5 hours when they were supposed to be 1, and all the Bengali community people got upset because we were supposed to start the puja at 7, but I started at 9 because I was bringing my usual bullshit into the thing. But like it was at the Dhuni, like in the small hours of the night, in the silent watches of the night, that I would argue really felt Ramakrishna. Because God forbid if I live and die within the confines of institutional walls. All of this happens outside the institution, and therefore no one can say nothing. Watch out, honey, I'm using technology and I ain't got time for no apology. This is so important to me that May Day, like the spring of Ramakrishna, like this crescent moon which is waxing, is something that can only be understood in the fullness of time. But for that to happen, it must be approached from so many different points of view, from within the institution and from without the institution. We're all working together to unspool the message that is Sri Ramakrishna, to unfold the blooming of this lotus flower whose fragrance will be like a forest fire in a sandalwood forest. So with this in mind, I just want to say something about May Day, about Beltane, and to talk about Sri Ramakrishna as if he's the springtime of spirituality. And now there's a new whiff in the air, if you will. I had an Uber driver today coming back from Sherman Oaks, and we were talking about the police and how like the police are like the dogs of the state who are conditioned and controlled in order to like defend what would otherwise be a very feeble structure. And he was talking about how the revolution begins when police officers wake up to the fact that they don't need to defend their tyrants. And more importantly, if they would just step aside, it would be over for the 1%, as it were. But more importantly, I countered and said, why would they just need to step aside? They could join. They would join the revolution. As I was stepping out of the car, I said to my guy, Eugene, I was like, I'll see you on the battlefield. And it was a wonderful feeling where we're like smelling the air. We're like, there's a smell of a bonfire. And around that bonfire, witches are dancing in mad delight. And what will be the kindling, what will be the fuel? Not the necessarily physical structures of the world, but a far more pernicious tyranny, the psychological structures that we have all of us internalized as a result of growing up in such physical institutions. It's not about the bricks of the physical building that we need to, it's not about that. It's the bricks of the internal building that tell us we should slave away building on someone else's dream. So having said all that, it's important that May 1st, which is Beltane, which is the day of welcoming the ushering in the new season, it was on that day that the Ramakrishna Math was established. So to me, this is like the clarion call, the trumpet call that heralds the revolution. And so I want to read a little bit from, if you don't mind, this excerpt. This is from the Life of Swami Vivekananda, volume 2, from the chapter Back to Bengal. So Sarat Chandra was with the Swami that day. On their way back to Bagh Bazar, the latter spoke about women's education as follows: religion, arts, science, housekeeping, cooking, sewing, hygiene, the simple essential points in these subjects ought to be taught to our women. It is not good to leave this alone. The Mahakali Patashala is to a great extent moving in the right direction. But only teaching rites of worship won't do. Their education must be an eye-opener in all matters. Ideal characters must always be presented before the girls to imbue them with the devotion to the lofty principles of selflessness. The noble examples of Sita, Savitri, Damayanti, Leelavati, Khanna, and Meera should be inspired to mold their own lives in light of these. So Swamiji is often talking about women's education, and we talked about this last week too. After the suicide of his sister, he was particularly fired up about the plight of Indian women, as any Shakta would be. And it's interesting because you can already see he's just walking with Sharat Chandra, one of his like direct disciples and one of the most important Nexus Sister Nivedita disciples that he would have. Because what M does for Ramakrishna, to some extent Sharat Chandra does for Vivekananda. So a lot of what we have on Vivekananda come from these like diaries that Sharat Chandra is keeping in with regards to private conversations that he's having with the Swami. He's also a great character. There's a whole railroad train leela that we can talk about here, but we don't need to get into it now. He wrote a beautiful song. Murta Maheshwara, you know that song? Where he describes Swamiji's like actions in the West as like a tandava that he's dancing to destroy old ideas. So Swamiji's ecstatic and destructive and apocalyptic dance, he danced in the West, in London and in New York and everywhere else. Yes, Murta Maheshwara, he who is in the form of Shiva dancing his fierce tandava. So anyway, Sharat Chandra records this conversation, and notice they're just walking, they're just like hanging out, and Swamiji is like spitballing all of these ideas in a state of apostolic fervor. Now, whenever the Swami came to Kolkata, he stayed for a short time at the Balaram Babu's house in Bagh Bazar, where he and the monastic members of the order always met with warm hospitality. On such occasions, devotees and visitors from all parts of the city gathered there. Okay, I can't resist an anecdote. When I was in Kolkata and I was visiting M's ashrama, which has since been absorbed into the Ramakrishna Math Mission, I decided, okay, I would stop by Bagh Bazar. There's also a really good chai wala just across the street in that little alley outside of Balaram's house. So I went over to Balaram's house, and I had fully intended to get to the mutt in order to make it for Arati. Because I really love the Arati at the mutt. It's special, like just the beautiful organ, kind of like church, like Gregorian feel of Kandana Bhava Bandhana. It opens with that like Kandana Bhava Bandhana. It's like just Gregorian and solemn and grave, and then it opens like it closes with that like ecstatic ranga vanga vanga, like it's just like so great. I just love it hits, it really hits. So I was very attached, I guess you could say, to getting to the hall early so I could find a spot to sit. Otherwise it just fills up at Arati time. You won't find a place to sit and meditate, and I like just like meditating there for a little while, even if it's just 10 minutes. And then when that Kandana comes on, that shit hits, bro. So I wanted to be back in time for the Arati. But of course I stopped at Balaram's house just for a quick darshan and for the chai actually. But then when I got there, they'd already started their Arati, like ahead of time. And they were singing songs and whatnot. And the thing about Balaram's house is, just like in Sri Ramakrishna's time, it's a place associated with great music and festivity. Unlike the mutt, which requires you to take a ferry, and it's like no, you don't have to take the ferry. You can also get there through the road. But it's like the mutt, it's like the monastic place. And of course, it's flooded with people just having picnics and fishing and whatnot. It's a place that welcomes all. But still, there's something about Kolkata and something about it being in the middle of the city. It's just that there's an access to Balaram's house that maybe you don't feel with any other center of Sri Ramakrishna's. So it's a special place, and it's a place associated with much singing and dancing in a very eclectic group. So when I got to the house, I said to the Swami, Marge, okay, I'm going to take my leave. I want to make it back in time for Arati. And he looked at me like aghast. He was like, where would you go other than here? Like, we're banging the drum, we're singing the songs. Like, where else is there an arati if not right here, right now? And I remember looking at him like, I was like, yeah, fuck, you're right. And then we just had the best arati ever. And it was so great. And it was like the beginning of me like slowly releasing my death grip on forms that have served me in the past, you know. My addiction to meditation, my addiction to certain religious practices. Like, it was in Balaram's house that I first felt that loosening of my death grip on my forms, if you will. It's where my madness really began, I guess, by Sri Ramakrishna's grace. So this is important. This is happening in that house. Oh my God. That place is mad. I have so many leelas with that place. And each time it's just so important to me. Anyway, so just that little anecdote there. We have already noted the Swami's intention to start an organization for service on all levels, from the spiritual to the material. Service in which monks, devotees, and general public would cooperate. Accordingly, on his return from Darjeeling, he called a meeting of all the monastic and lay disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. It took place at 3 p.m. on Saturday, May 1st, 1897, at Balaram Babu's house. When all had assembled, the Swami opened the meeting with the following words in Bengali. From my travels in various countries, I have come to the conclusion that without organization, nothing great and permanent can be done. But in a country like India, at our present stage of development, it does not seem to me well advised to start an organization on a democratic basis in which every member has an equal voice and decisions are arrived at by a majority of the votes of the community. With the West, the case is different. Amongst us also, when with the spread of education we learn to sacrifice, to stand above our individual interests and concerns for the good of the community or the nation at large, then it will be possible to work on a democratic basis. Taking this into consideration, we should have for our organization at present a director whose orders everyone should obey. Then, in the fullness of time, it will be guided by the opinion and the consent of members. There's a lot that we can get into here with Swamiji's views on democracy and the tyranny of the bureaucrats and his like defense of monarchist approaches to spiritual life, but more along the lines of Plato's philosopher king. So here the director would not be necessarily a Führer of sorts, but in effect it would be a philosopher king as per the Platonic ideal. I think of Star Wars, and of course being May 4th, I can't resist this parallel. I just hate to what extent I really identify with Skywalker, and I think you should. Because, like, I know what it is to feel constrained by an institution and want to learn something beyond the borders of that institution. I can, like, really sympathize with Anakin's frustration when he knows he's made for more, and yet his institution won't teach him more. And so he has to go outside of the institution and maybe resort to unscrupulous means in his quest for knowledge. Isn't that beautiful? Thank you, my dear. And so when he in episode 2 in Attack of the Clones, we should marathon the prequels tonight if you want. I don't know.
Lord of the Rings?
No, Star Wars. But
Oh.
and we were gonna go see a horror film, but maybe we should just, in honor of May 4th, like
Star Wars Day.
just watch all the prequels.
Okay.
But anyway, in Attack of the Clones, it's okay. We'll come to the conclusion on a democratic basis later. But in Attack of the Clones, he's like talking to Padme, I think, and he's just feeling so frustrated because he knows that he should be learning more, but he's not being taught more. He's on a quest for power. In other words, he's on a quest for knowledge. And I think that's a holy and wonderful thing. He's a Shakta if ever there was one. Then there's that meme, you know, where in Attack of the Clones, he's like frolicking with Padme in the grass, and he expresses his political views, and to some extent he says, we need a Führer. Like, it's just not working. Like, this whole democratic thing, it's just a tyranny of bureaucrats and oligarchs and whatnot, all under the, like, noble name of the the will of the people, but, like, is it really working for us? And so Padme is like, a believer in democracy, she's like, wait, you're not serious, are you? And he's like, hee. And so part of like Anakin's defecting to the dark side is his alternative political views, much like Count Dooku or whatever. They're just like political idealists in one sense. And they feel the need of like strong leadership. And of course, this is historically very problematic for us because we find that in almost every case of such strong leadership, it's the least qualified person with some of the worst, most civilizationally regressive ideas that tend to take up this position. So with the Ramakrishna Math Mission, it's interesting. Swamiji is making a case for a director. Like Anakin would be so down for this, you know. Like, it's interesting, and we have various instances when he's on pilgrimage with some of his disciples, going to Amarnath, I believe, where he expresses some of his political views on the matter, and he talks about how personal it is to be able to approach a Raja and how impersonal documents and paperwork and bureaucracy can be. So he's interested in the rule of a leader, much like the rule of a personal god, which is interesting because if Swamiji is defending a personal god or personalizing a political system, like that's interesting because he's also such an advocate for the impersonal. So we find that he speaks very highly of American democracy, but he also speaks very highly of monarchies and this kind of approach with the director who can like just make executive decisions, if you will. That's another one of the contradictions in Swamiji's personality. It's just worth saying as an aside. Now continuing. The association will bear the name of him in whose name we have become sannyasins. Him, taking whom as your ideal you are leading the householder life in the field of activity, this samsara. Him whose holy name and the influence of whose unique life and teachings have within 12 years of his demise spread in such an unthought of way both in the East and the West. Let this Sangha therefore be named the Ramakrishna Mission. We are but the servants of the Master. May you all help in this work. That final passage is just so stirring. The proposal was enthusiastically supported by all the householder disciples. There was discussion about the future method of work. In this meeting on May 1st, the Ramakrishna Mission Association was established, and at a second meeting on May 5th, which is tomorrow for us, and today for India, resolutions were passed laying down the main principles by which the movement was to be guided, and its aims and objects. As originally drawn up, these were as follows. This Sangha shall be known as the Ramakrishna Mission. The aim of the Sangha is to preach those truths which Sri Ramakrishna has, for the good of humanity, preached and demonstrated by practical application in his own life, and to help others to put these truths into practice in their lives for their temporal, mental, and spiritual advancement. The duty of the mission is to conduct in the right spirit the activities of the movement inaugurated by Sri Ramakrishna for the establishment of fellowship among the followers of different religions, knowing them all to be so many forms only of one undying eternal religion. In another place, in the Bellarmine Monastic Handbook, Swamiji said we should not read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna as if it were a gospel. That's why it's somewhat unfortunately titled the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He says it should be read as a commentary, like the Gita is a commentary on the eternal Veda. And remember, by Vedas, no books are meant. So it's like we're holding this very lightly, and more importantly, we're expressing that the message of the Master is the message of all religions. We're standing up for Sanatana Dharma, not the way that the Hindutva Instagram influencers are meaning it. Sanatana Dharma does not mean Hinduism. Sanatana Dharma means that religion which includes Abrahamic traditions too, and non-Abrahamic and non-Eastern traditions. Like, it's very important to express this. Its methods of actions are A, to train people so as to make them competent to teach such knowledge or sciences as are conducive to the material and spiritual welfare of the masses. B, to promote and encourage arts and industries. Think of the Pali Mangal, for instance. And C, to introduce and spread among the people in general Vedantic and other religious ideas in the way in which they were elucidated in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. So if you are telling me that I cannot teach Tantra in the name of Sri Ramakrishna because you're only allowed to teach Vedanta in the name of Sri Ramakrishna, look back at your charter, friends, because it clearly says Vedantic and other religious ideas in the way they were elucidated in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Using the life of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and Sarada Devi as my basis, I am presenting these Kaula and Vama ideas, which are included, are they not, in your Sanatana Dharma? Or have you decided that Sanatana Dharma now includes everything but my Kaula Marga and my Vamachara? Indian Work Department. The activities of the mission should be directed to the establishment of mutts and ashramas in different parts of India for the training of sannyasins and such of the householders as may be willing to devote their lives to educate others, and to the finding of the means by which they would be enabled to educate the people by going about from one province to another. Okay, so you who are proud of your ochre robes, remember what the ochre robes signify. That you have renounced the world. Must you wear that cloth to renounce the world? Are all world renunciants clad in orange? And are all those who are clad in orange world renouncers? So my question is, if in this meeting both householders and monastics were present, if Swamiji has blurred the line between sacred and secular, my question then is, why are only monks allowed to teach in the Ramakrishna Mission? The senior monks have no problem with me teaching, but some of the junior ones, arguably, who are proud of their ochre robe, will say that because I'm dressed in black and not orange, because I have not taken the same vows as them, Therefore, I am not allowed to teach and represent the message of Sri Ramakrishna. But does it not say in the charter, right here, that the training of sannyasins and such of the householders who may be willing to devote their lives to educate others and to the finding of the means by which they will be enabled to educate the people by going about from one province to another? Is not the word householder included there? Or is this teaching only meant for monks? Mark my words, long after you have come and gone and your platforms have been taken from you, I will still be here, I will still be teaching. For I have pledged my life to the service of Sri Ramakrishna. And that's between me and him. So whatever you have to say about that, it's more your problem than mine. And really the problem here is that you haven't read your own charter. Continuing. In the work in the foreign department, should be to send trained members of the order to countries outside of India to start centers there for the preaching of Vedanta in order to bring about a closer relation and better understanding between India and foreign countries. Now here is where I think a response is available to the institutions that be. They might say, well, okay, see, the foreign department, aren't you teaching in America? And we're saying that only those who are trained members of the order ought to be sent outside of India for the preaching of Vedanta, right? Cool, no problem with that, except I am not preaching Vedanta. The aims and ideals of the mission being purely spiritual and humanitarian, it shall have no connection with politics. Anyone who believes in the mission of Sri Ramakrishna or who sympathizes or is willing to cooperate with the above mentioned aims and objects of the association is eligible for membership. It's wonderful. After the resolutions had been passed, office bearers were appointed. The Swami himself became the general president, but then he quickly made Swami Brahmananda and Swami Yogananda president and vice president respectively of the Kolkata Center. Narendranath Mitra, a disciple of the master and solicitor, was appointed secretary, Dr. Shashibhushan Ghosh and Sharat Chandra Sharkar, under-secretaries, and Sharat Chandra Chakravarti, reader of scriptures. I love that title, reader of scriptures. This is Swamiji's disciple, who we talked about earlier. It was also decided that meetings would be held at Balaram Babu's house every Sunday afternoon when the Gita, Upanishads, or other scriptures would be recited or read. Expositions would be given, papers read, and lectures delivered. The subjects would be chosen by the president. So interestingly, a lot of this is still just about Sangha. It's just about spiritual fellowship. And it's about getting together at an appointed time, at least weekly, in order to do spiritual shit, like talk about cool ideas that you find in spiritual texts. And the texts are vast and far-ranging. Mainly Upanishadic things like the Gita, like the Vedas, so mostly this is Vedanta. But of course also, like Swamiji's Vedanta is far broader than Kevala Advaita, Ramanuja's Vishishta Advaita. So you can see here that the main purpose of the organization, like, you know, put aside all the stuff we just read, really the main activity here is just to get together with a group of enthusiasts and talk about ideas that we're all jointly enthusiastic about. You know, that's the heart, that's the nucleus of the Ramakrishna Math Mission. It's the spiritual core, and that's what Christianity is too. All the big edifices that you have now, the Vatican and whatnot, they can all be traced back, arguably, to this gathering of people at dinner reading Paul's letters. Like, so much of Christianity is just getting together to read the letters of Paul, the apostle. It's a very important idea. So it's these simple things, you know, WhatsApp groups and gathering on Sunday at 3 p.m. It's these simple beginnings that seem to have the most far-reaching effects. When the meeting had broken up, most of the lay members departed. The Swamiji said to Swami Yogananda, so the work has now begun in this way. Let us see how it succeeds by the will of Sri Ramakrishna. To me, this is such an important statement. Everything happens by Mother Kali's will. Things are founded and things are dissolved by Mother Kali's will. And so it's kind of cute because he's saying like, okay, whatever, we started it, let's see what happens. It's a very like Indian sentiment of like, okay, let's see what to do. Let's see what happens. Let's see what Sri Ramakrishna will do with this thing that we put forth for him in his name. Because ultimately by his grace alone is it happening. So he's not even attached to the mission, having like spoken with such stirring, soul-moving words, having established it, having appointed all of these people, including a reader of scriptures, whatever that is, like someone who's appointed to read. Like, having done all of that, he's like, okay, he says to Swami Yogananda, let's just see what happens. So it's like chill, because at the end of the day, they're established in something even deeper than all these organizations and movements and forms and institutions and whatnot. Swami Yogananda said, now this is where it gets interesting. Swami Yogananda said, you are doing these things by Western methods. Would you say that Sri Ramakrishna left us any such instruction? Now, this is interesting because Swami Yogananda is, interestingly, voicing the very concern that Swami Vivekananda internally felt, which caused him to like delay starting the organization. He was dragging his feet when it came to organization because he didn't really feel like it was in keeping with Sri Ramakrishna's bhava, which was a very informal, like personable approach. All of this just seemed too formal, you know, like literally it's a form. There are forms that you sign even in order to get membership, and dues that are due every month and things like that. Like all of that seemed very Western necessarily. Organization is a Western idea. In fact, when Swami Vivekananda was here in America, he came back from a lecture and he said to one of his hosts, "I've fallen in love," or something. And the lady said, "Oh, who's the lucky woman, Swamiji?" And he said, "Organization." Because he sees what you can, you know, like you can see what you can accomplish through organization. You can do a Holocaust through organization. That's one of the reasons why the Holocaust was so disturbing, because we saw like Western civilization used in such a destructive way. Science, record keeping, you know, railroads, like all these things that we had celebrated as cultural achievements. Those were the very levers through which that genocide was enacted. So organization is a powerful thing, actually. Indians are powerful, but it's like the sun. It's powerful like the sun. Like often it's just scattered. Like if you can put a magnifying glass before the sun that is India's spiritual culture, you would really have a force to be reckoned with. And that's what Swamiji wants to do. He wants to organize in order to like direct and essentialize and maybe even concentrate that power. But it's still in the West that he was inspired to do this. So Swami Yogananda naturally brings up this concern, like this is all very foreign, literally very foreign to us, and definitely not in keeping with Sri Ramakrishna's bhava. So Swami Yogananda outwardly expresses something that Swami Vivekananda had been struggling with for a long time, I would argue. Now the Swami said, this is interesting, the Swami said, "How do you know that these methods are not in keeping with his ideas? Sri Ramakrishna was the embodiment of infinite ideas. Do you want to shut him up in your own limits? I shall break those limits and scatter his ideas broadcast all over the world. He never instructed me to introduce worship of him and so forth. The methods of spiritual practice, concentration and meditation, and higher ideals of religion that he taught, those we must realize and teach to all men. Infinite are the ideas, and infinite are the paths that lead to the goal. I was not born to create a new sect in this world, too full of sects already. Blessed are we that we have found refuge at the feet of our Master. It is our duty to give the ideas entrusted to us freely to the world." And so when people are like, "No, don't share the secrets of Tantra, you don't know what you're doing, your very books tell you not to do this, the Kolanava Tantra says you will go to hell for doing this," okay, fine, let me go there then. Let me suffer the worst of tortures in hell. Because these ideas which have come to me, it is my sacred duty by the clarion call of Vivekananda to scatter broadcast around the world and share with anyone who is sincerely seeking. And more importantly, this is my response to all those people who have a problem with the way that I'm representing Sri Ramakrishna. It's like, do you want to shut him up in your own limits? I shall break those limits. As Vivekananda said so, I should say so too. It would make him proud if I said so as well. That we don't need to say Ramakrishna is this and not that. We can say Ramakrishna is this and that. And I think that's an important point to make on a matter of like anecdote and personal pathos. Continuing, Swami Yogananda did not dissent, and so the Swami continued. "Time and again I have received in this life marks of his grace. He himself is at my back and is making me do all these things in these ways. When I used to lie under a tree, exhausted, smitten with hunger, when I had not a strip of cloth even to tie my kaupina, my loincloth with, when I had resolved to travel around the world penniless, even then, through his grace, I received help in every way. Then again, when people in crowds jostled with one another in the streets of Chicago to have sight of this Vivekananda, I was able, through his blessing, to digest without difficulty all that honor, 100th part of which would have turned the head of any other man. By the will of the Lord, victory has been mine everywhere. Now, I intend to do something for this country. Do you all give up doubts and misgivings, and do you all now give up doubts and misgivings and help me in my work, and you will see how by his grace wonders will be accomplished." It's a remarkable thing. What Sri Ramakrishna wants to see happen will happen. So for all those people who are trying to deplatform me, I will not yield. Do not yield, sannyas in bold. And I almost did, by the way. I almost went to Kashi and just fucked off before Viranatha sent me a mail package of Kashi Golin and saying that you have Kashi at home. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, but like, you can ban me on every social media platform. You can tell me I shouldn't be doing this. You can tell me it's irresponsible to be doing this. And at a time, I might have believed you. But like, everything happens by the grace of the Lord. If indeed this should be happening, it will happen. And if it isn't to be happening, then he himself will deplatform me. You don't have to go through so much trouble. But I applaud you for the efforts that you are taking to deplatform me. I'm still here. So keep trying. Continuing, the Swami said, okay, Swami Yogananda continues, "Whatever you will shall come about. We are always ready to follow your leading. I clearly see that the Master is working through you. Still, I confess, doubts do sometimes arise in the mind. This is healthy and good. For as we saw it, his method of doing things was so different. And so I am led to ask myself whether we are not straying from Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. This is very valuable and very important. Some people have already decided that I have. But others who have really helped me in my life have, with much sympathy and much love, asked me this question. Brother, are we straying? But it's not coming from a place of, I believe Ramakrishna taught this, he only taught this, what you're saying is very different from what I believe he taught, so fuck you, stop speaking, right? It's not coming from that place. And when it's coming from this place, it's infinitely valuable. Because this kind of check and balance is required when there is such apostolic fervor. Lest this become fanaticism or extremism, it's good to catch ourselves and ask ourselves time and time again, are we getting carried away with our own fervor, with our own apostolic enthusiasm? So this is a beautiful question and a beautiful place from which Swami Yogananda is coming. So then the Swami said, the thing is this, and you have to remember, the meeting is done. Everyone's already gone home. This is like among friends. It's an inner circle kind of conversation. And so this is so beautiful. Swamiji says, the thing is this, Sri Ramakrishna is far greater than his disciples understand him to be. He is the embodiment of infinite spiritual ideas, capable of development in infinite ways. Even if one can find a limit to the knowledge of Brahman, one cannot measure the unfathomable depths of our Master's mind. One gracious glance of his eyes can create 100,000 Vivekanandas at this instant. But if this time he chooses instead to work through me, making me his instrument, I can only bow to his will. It was the Swami, among all the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, who saw in the Master not a person only, but a principle, not the apostle of realization and renunciation only, but that of service to humanity in the spirit of worship also. Did not the Master renounce the bliss of Brahman to be of service to mankind? Did he not treat all beings as Narayanas, divinities, every moment of his life? Who among his disciples had not seen his unhappiness at the sight of poverty and misery, and his touching solicitude over their relief? True, this phase of the Master's personality was overshadowed by the sublimity of his illumination, but his superconscious flights, and by his utterances of wonderful power and charm, exhorting all to seek the highest. It was left to the genius of Swami Vivekananda to interpret Sri Ramakrishna's life and teachings from all angles. It was left to this, his greatest disciple, to bring out and emphasize the human side of his Master's nature and message, and to clear away the misconceptions that prevailed in the minds of many, that renunciation and service were conflicting ideals, which could not be combined without detriment to one or the other. You know what I noticed? There was a kind of tension between these two ideals. Renounce the world and fuck off to the Himalayas, or plunge into the world and serve people. Anytime you have a dyad, a kind of tension, there is some third thing which you can point to that reconciles the dyad. There is some synthesis of the thesis and antithesis. In my life, and like in the past 6 years of teaching here in this country, I've been met with very strong opposition to what I have to say, mainly because the tension here is not between renunciation and service, but the tension here is between moksha and bhoga. Haven't you noticed? A lot of people, their problem with me in general, just as a person, as a human being, is that I like to have fun. I really like chocolate cake. I really love good meals. I really love fine beverages, and I love all the things that the world has to offer. And I don't find that participation in any of these things in any way, shape, or form demeans or delegitimizes my spirituality. Rather, I feel the thing about consciousness is that it's so pure and so profound that once you recognize your own inherent nature as sky-like consciousness, nothing can stain you. And having rigorously tried to test it in the past year or two, it is clear to me now that whether you meditate or don't meditate, whether you do puja or don't do puja, whether you eat this or don't eat that, or whether you go here or don't go there, none of that really matters when it comes to recognizing your sky-like luminosity as pure awareness. Nothing can stain you, nothing can touch you. No, the sky thy roof, the grass thy bed, and food whatever chance may bring. Well cooked or ill, judge not, because no food, substance, or place, or person could ever taint that noble soul which knows itself. Having said this, it's remarkable to me that in this world, especially in America, so oriented towards bhoga, there's this deep internalized sense that it's somehow wrong to enjoy life, to participate in life. You know, and in this time, like the word is service. Service here is being used for world engagement. Here, of course, in the sense of building institutions like hospitals and orphanages and schools, like donating, things like that. But in another sense, it's also like just being in the world in the sense of being able to go to the movies, being able to listen to like music that you like, being able to participate in the activities or the groups or the places that make you happy in like a very secular and material and maybe even sensual sense. Like the fact that that somehow is understood by our modern contemporary spiritual communities to be mutually exclusive to the project of like disciplined, struggling, pursuit of liberation. Lady of Guadalupe, Jaima. The Sthana Devata of this place, of the West Coast. The Grama Devata, Sthana Devata, and for many people, the Kula Devata. And for many people, the Ishta Devata, of course. There was just Jalamukhi Devi was giving some darshan. Okay, so this is so important. Like, I have felt this strong tension between moksha, the path of attaining some transcendental realization beyond the senses, and the participation of the sensual delights that the world offers. In this like Katha Upanishad, Shreyas versus Preyas, two roads diverge in the wood kind of way. It seems like most people have internalized the idea that these are mutually exclusive. The Tantric tradition has always pushed back against this idea. They've argued that spiritual life guarantees you both bhoga and moksha. It's an ancient idea, an idea that we find even in the Chandi, where both characters, one whose name is literally sex, Surata is like euphemism. Rata means chariot. Surata means good chariot, meaning a good ride. So his name is sex, and naturally what he asks the Divine Mother for is lordship over the world. He wants bhoga. And the other, the merchant, his name is Samadhi, and he gains this super sensuous transcendental bliss of Samadhi. The idea that they are mutually exclusive to one another is not something I think that you can support through Sri Ramakrishna's life, because people will point to this like Kamini Kanchan thing. No. It's the idea that the world will make you happy that we reject. The world cannot make you happy. Your happiness is inherent in awareness. And once you recognize that happiness, the way that happiness can flow forth can include participation in the world. But it's a nuance. There's an important nuance to point to here, which is why for a lot of people it turns into addiction, into hedonism, into something dissatisfying. So it's not the case that when you enjoy the world you'll be dissatisfied. If you're satisfied already, it's like adding zeros after a one. The more zeros you add after the one, the bigger the number is. So you don't have to think in a binary way between 0 and 1. You can have the 1 and the 0, and the thing about the zeros is the more of them you add, the more of the 1 you express. There's something very subtle here, very profound, that I'm going to touch upon hopefully at the end of this lecture. But I find in this current context, the tension, like that back then it was renunciation and service, here it might be moksha and bhoga. It's an age-old tension that our tantric texts have always tried to reconcile by pointing to some third thing. Right? And I'm going to say temporal happiness is only temporal to the one who has not discovered themselves as time. I reject all your notions of temporal and eternal. I reject your ideas that the immanent is different from the transcendent. I reject your idea that spiritual joy is somehow categorically distinct from the joy that you can have in this world. And I point you to your own scriptures, like Taittiriya Upanishad, in which you see, while there is this stratification or hierarchicalization of Ananda, it is the same Ananda that you call Brahmananda that you are experiencing in Bhajanananda. It's that same Ananda that you're experiencing in Vishayananda. In the Vijnana Bhairava verses 69 through, or actually 63 or something through 75, you clearly see this idea like expressed fully. That nothing can really take away from your divine joy. That divine joy is actually the joy that you are enjoying in your glass of wine. The wine is already in the blood. It flows within you. The ecstasy is yours. Like if you were not here to enjoy it, it would not be enjoyable. So when you enjoy it, it is only yourself that you are enjoying. But because you are afraid of yourself, you are afraid of joy, that anytime you touch it in the world, you feel yourself to be tainted and sullied. You will not find the joy of Ananda, the bliss of Brahman, if you are afraid of bliss in every other instance in which you've encountered it. What do you know of enjoying God, you who have not learned to enjoy the world? Is the world something other than God? Heaven will be really boring to one who has not learned to savor chocolate cake. You'll arrive at the rivers of milk and honey, and you will have this weird hang-up about drinking from such streams. Continuing. So yeah, just this tension, right? Renunciation and service. And again, the tension between moksha and bhoga, which I want to address. There's a tension, and it's a necessary tension. It sets up the dynamism which is required for the trika, for that triadic kind of resolution, which is not a absence of dynamism, but a host or a space or a kind of ground in which that dynamism, in which that tension can exist. So anyway, on another occasion, after that of the above conversation, okay, this is where it gets really interesting, with Swami Yogananda, when the Swami was staying at Balaram Babu's house, he was talking in a light mood. with some of his brother monks and with some lay disciples of the master. At such times, he would be full of wit and jokes. Swami Adbhutananda was taking him to task for not preaching the ideas of Sri Ramakrishna and was challenging him to prove how his plans could be reconciled with the latter's teaching. Sri Ramakrishna insisted, above all, on bhakti and on the practice of sadhana for the realization of God, while the Swami, Adbhutananda pointed out, was constantly urging them to go about preaching and serving the poor and the deceased, those things that turned the mind outward, which was the great impediment to sadhana. Then again, the Swami's idea of starting mutts and homes of service for the public good, his ideas of organization and of patriotism, which were undoubtedly Western in conception, his efforts to create a new type of sannyasi with a broader ideal of renunciation, and other ideas similar in spirit were incompatible with Sri Ramakrishna's ideal of renunciation and would surely have been repudiated by him. A lot of people say this, like if Sri Ramakrishna was here, he would have a problem with what you were saying. If Vivekananda was here, he would have a problem with what you're saying. Because we have a problem with what you're saying. Since when did you speak for Vivekananda and Ramakrishna? Right? And more importantly, I will take it up with them. Don't you think I too, who have been initiated into this lineage, will see them at the end of my life? If what I'm doing is wrong, it is their job to teach me, not really yours. Because what I see you doing is pushing your understanding of Ramakrishna onto me. You're saying that bhoga, or the enjoyment of the world, or the idea that it doesn't matter what you eat and what you wear, that it doesn't even matter whether or not you do puja or whether or not you meditate. The idea that somehow the spiritual practice itself should be fun and not a disciplined effort, a struggle, a repression. Like that idea you're saying is not in keeping with Sri Ramakrishna, because you've made him out to be this like Abrahamic, like Puritan par excellence who has a problem with the world, when in fact he enjoyed his jalebi. Like, it's really important to me that we look at this idea that it does seem that there are tensions and contradictions within Ramakrishna. Thank God, because that prevents us from boxing him into any one view or the other. And it is important to bring them up. That's part of like the beauty of this organization and this mission and this community, is that we're not afraid to question and ask. And so it's really important to me that like if you have a problem with what I'm doing, we can talk about it. The way that Swami Adbhutananda is like bringing this up with Swami Vivekananda, if you think the way I'm representing Sri Ramakrishna is doing a disservice to Sri Ramakrishna, maybe you should come here to this Zoom. Maybe at the end of the lecture, you can unmute. I don't even need you to have your camera on. You can come with a fake name if you want. But talk to me about it, because I am going to defend myself. I'm going to point to the Ramakrishna literature. I'm going to point to Vivekananda. I'm going to point to the gospel. Sometimes I even doubt that you have read those things. But I'm going to point to those things, and with a voice of thunder and conviction, I'm going to debate you. But rather than face me in open debate, rather than asking me from a good place whether or not what I'm doing is representing Sri Ramakrishna, you take to back alley internet threads, and there you voice your dissent. For who? For who is that dissent voiced, if not to your own filter bubble of people who already agree with you? If you want to debate me, my sword is drawn and I'm waiting. Debate me. Talk to me. Come and face me. Cowards. Surely Ramakrishna taught you better than that. Now, continuing. Okay, where were we? Okay, so this is really good. It's really good that Swami Adbhutananda is bringing this up. So, the Swami at first took these observations of Swami Adbhutananda lightly and retorted jokingly, saying, "What do you know? You are an ignorant man. You are indeed a fit disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. Like Guru, like Chela. Your education ended with Ka, the first letter of the alphabet, like that of Prahlada. Being reminded by Ka of Krishna, he could not proceed further. You are bhaktas, in other words, sentimental fools. What do you understand of religion? You are babies. You are only good at praying with folded hands. Oh Lord, how beautiful your nose is, how sweet your eyes are, and such nonsense. And you think your salvation is secured, that Sri Ramakrishna will come at the final hour and take you up by the hand to the highest heaven. Study, public preaching, and doing humanitarian works are, according to you, Maya, because Sri Ramakrishna did not do them himself, because he said to someone, seek and find God first. Doing good to the world is presumptuous. As if God realization is such an easy thing to achieve. As if he is such a fool as to make himself a plaything in the hands of an imbecile." So, Swami Vivekananda, with the voice of thunder, is like responding to Adbhutananda's critique, right? But it's still lighthearted, it's still fun. They're just teasing one another. And so I want to point out that like, I'm going to be quite fierce. I often have my moods, and this is one of them. But like, I'm just teasing. I'm just playing. There's no bad blood. Like, seriously, try me. Anyone who thinks I have a problem with them, call me. Just see what happens. I have no problem with anybody, and you're all welcome back, much to the chagrin of many of you in this community that are interested in protecting our space from such forces. You have no idea how welcome you motherfuckers are. Try me, motherfucker. Try me. If you think that you have wronged me in any way, shape, or form, show up at my next retreat, see how I'm going to treat you. See how I can't speak for the community, but at least we'll defend you. You know, I'll make sure that your place in this community is guaranteed, because this is not a community that traps you in staying, and nor is it a community that locks you out, because this is not an institution. We're not indoors. We're in the open space, in the public, if you will, under the vast sky. Each is free to come and leave as they choose, and come back as they choose. So again, if I'm going to be like fierce and mean, I'm just joking, you guys. It's just for fun. It's just a leela. Yeah. I love you more than you could ever hate me. I love you more than you can ever hate what I have to teach. And interestingly, we can still be friends outside of all of this. Do you know what I mean? This is my hobby. This is something I do on the internet for fun when I'm drunk and want to talk to people. Like, just chill. I'm drunk and talking on the internet. Let's just, like, we can be friends outside of this, you know. You know, I'm like a human being outside of, like, making content on the internet. God forbid my life is just making content on the internet. How sad. I also know some really good restaurants. Thank you. Thank you. I got a testimony. I've only brought you to so few. Just wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll take an even better place. Okay, anyway, my point is, it's like just for fun. And so this is still just for fun. Swamiji is just like playing with Adbhutananda. But now check this out. Swami Adbhutananda later told a devotee, I was stunned to hear all these things. And when some other brother monk tried to say something, taking up the thread of our talk, Vivekananda grew more and more serious and thundered on. So now something is happening. He's starting like in this light-hearted way, just kind of joshing about with his brother disciples, but then he starts to become more and more serious, and now he thunders on. So this is what we're going to take note of. Everything up to this point is just him playing with his brother disciples. But now check this out. This is where it gets really important, and this is the heart of today's lecture. The Swami now said, you think you understand Sri Ramakrishna better than myself? You think jnana is dry knowledge to be attained by a desert path, killing out the tenderest faculties of the heart? Your bhakti is sentimental nonsense which makes one impotent. You want to preach Ramakrishna as you have understood him, which is mighty little. Hands off. Who cares for your Ramakrishna? Who cares for your bhakti and mukti? Who cares what the scriptures say? Who cares what the scriptures say? Who cares what the scriptures say? I certainly don't. Sue me. I will go to hell cheerfully 1,000 times if I can rouse my countrymen immersed in tamas, inertia, and make them stand on their own feet and be men, inspired with the spirit of karma yoga. I am not a follower of Sri Ramakrishna or anyone. Aha! There you have it. I am not a follower of Sri Ramakrishna or anyone. I learned better from Swami Vivekananda. I learned from Ramakrishna and Vivekananda to stand on my own 2 feet and stand on business, to stand on my interpretations and base my convictions on my life experience, not what someone said from the pulpit and not what someone translated for me in a book. This is very important. I don't care what the scriptures say. I don't care what men say. I care what my heart says and what my life experience says. And so this is so important. I am not a follower of Ramakrishna or anyone. I am a follower of him only who carries out my plans. I am not a servant of Ramakrishna or anyone, but of him only who serves and helps others without caring for his own mukti. The Swami's voice became choked. His frame shook with intense emotion. He could not contain himself any longer. Tears streamed from his eyes. In a flash, he was on his feet and ran from the room to his sleeping apartment. His brother disciples were seized with fear and repented for their criticism spoken to him in that strain. So I disagree with this. I don't think, I feel like this is the interjection of the author. I don't think anybody should repent for any criticism. Criticism is very valuable. It's very good. But you know, the thing about truth is that it can defend itself. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you have a problem with something, if that person you have a problem with is saying something, they're probably going to be willing to hear you out and defend their views if that view is at all worth defending. Do you know what I mean? So like, I have never yet debated anybody. It's a remarkable thing. Like, those who disagree with me have never disagreed with me to my face, really. And if you did, you would realize that not only is your criticism valid and it helps forward the discussion, but that I might also have something to say in defense. But that would be good, right? So I think when the authors here say, oh, they repented for their criticism, I disagree with that. I think they should not be repenting for their criticism. Because, by the way, if they didn't criticize Swamiji, we wouldn't have this awesome hot girl crash out and this awesome outburst, which is so valuable and so instructive. So I'm just going to disagree with that statement, and let's see just see where this goes. It's going to get really interesting. A few of them went to his room some minutes later. Entering quietly, they found him sitting in meditation, his body stiff, tears flowing from his half-closed eyes, and body hair standing on end. So something happened. Like when he started getting into this mood and he started talking in this way, something happened and he went into this spiritual state, and like now he's in obviously some kind of samadhi. So it seemed to them that he was absorbed in bhava samadhi. Yes. After nearly an hour, he rose, washed his face, and came out to those waiting in the sitting room. The atmosphere was tense. At length, the Swami broke the silence, saying, "When one attains bhakti, one's heart and nerves become so soft and delicate that they cannot bear even the touch of a flower. Do you know that I cannot even read a novel nowadays? I cannot think or talk of Sri Ramakrishna long without being overwhelmed. So I am trying and trying always to keep down the rush of bhakti welling within me. I am trying to bind myself with the iron chain of jnana, for still my work to my motherland is unfinished and my message to the world not yet fully delivered." Here, the sentiment of bhakti and the intellectual rigor of jnana, I think you can map onto the Ida and Pingala Nadi respectively. The Ida, the lunar channel, the path of the moon, has always been considered to be the path of devotion, but more importantly also the path of symbol and imagery and the subconscious mind. Right? And the path of Pingala is often attributed to the conscious mind turned outwards toward the material world that deals with logic and reason and analysis. So if you think of Ida and Pingala in like, maybe this is going to sound a bit dated, but in like neuroscientific terms, like the right and the left hemispheres of the brain, you could say like, okay, the left brain, or even the prefrontal cortex to update this model, like these are associated with the Pingala, the thinking, reasoning, discerning faculty that deals with the physical world. Whereas the Ida might refer to some deeper structure of the brain, or at least a different structure, we'll say the right hemisphere just for fun, which refers to maybe the sentimental interiority of the human experience. So one is the exteriority of the human experience, which, logic and reason does a lot for you when it comes to dealing with that. And of course, the interior faculty, the realm of dreams and poetry and symbolism, this we can say is the realm of bhakti. So bhakti and jnana, in Swamiji's language, I think can be updated to mean the right and left brain, or the subconscious, symbolic, imagistic brain, and the more like linguistic, discerning brain. Or you could say like the Ida and Pingala, to use traditional Tāntrik terms. Is that fair? You can use Ida Pingala in many ways. I'm just going to map this idea of bhakti and jnana onto the Ida Pingala idea. So I just met with Satyaji. It was so great, but Swami Vivekananda, not Swami, but Vivekananda, allegedly he said something really beautiful, which we read in the Agora books. He said, the path of bhakti is like staring at the moon. The thing about staring at the moon is you go crazy with love for God. The path of jnana is like staring at the sun. The thing about staring at the sun is you become blind to duality. Isn't that beautiful? And some walk the path of the sun, the path of intellectual inquiry and reasoning, which will bring you to the path of the moon, or you can go through the path of the moon and you will arrive at the path of the sun. Because Tantra is about neither of these things. You can't say Tantra is different from Bhakti. Tantra includes Bhakti. But you also can't say Tantra is different from Jnana, because Tantra includes Jnana. Tantra, I would say, is the triadic synthesis of the Bhakti-Jnana dyad. The Bhakti-Jnana thesis, antithesis is resolved in Tantra because Tantra is Sandhya Bhasha, the language of twilight. So using the metaphor of Pingala as the sun and Ida as the moon, or Jnana as the sun, or the conscious externalized mind as the sun, which, it's the daytime when you're able to discern between one thing and the other, and the subconscious lunar faculty as the moon, you could say Tantra is neither about the sun nor about the moon. And it doesn't deal in the exclusion of the sun and the moon. It's actually the union, the mystic union of Ida and Pingala, the union of Shiva and Shakti, of the masculine and feminine, which you could say is the conscious mind reconciled with the subconscious mind. That moment when the two come together, that's twilight, that's Sandhya Bhasha, that's Yamala, sexual union. Like that is what Tantra is about, the synthesis of Bhakti and Jnana. So here, Vivekananda, he's expressing this idea that he has got this like sentimental sort of imagistic subconscious current flowing within him, and then he's using his conscious mind with its faculties of reasoning to somehow direct that or control that or ground that. In this moment, when he expresses himself in this way, I think you're seeing this deeply, deeply meaningful idea of cutting off your own head and then holding it. What's the difference between madness and genius? I think it's articulation. When the bolt from the blue comes, the one who is not able to hold their head is evaporated in the spot. They're electrocuted and they're killed. The one who is able to hold that energy and direct that energy, we regard as a mystic, as a prophet, as a poet, as a genius. Their hair might be wild because they just got zapped by electricity. They might have hot girl crash outs like this. They might be horrifically misunderstood. Their lives might be a mess because of the energy they're trying to hold and the contradictions that it contains. But they've held it. They've held it together long enough to give their message before exploding in a fiery inferno at the touch of that lightning strike. So this is an important idea. Swamiji loses his head and then holds it and hands it to us on a platter, as it were. He hands us his heart and his head. Anyway, continuing. This is so interesting. So as soon as I find that bhakti feelings are coming up to sweep me off my feet, I give them a hard knock and make myself adamant by bringing up austere jnana. Oh, I have work to do. I am a slave of Ramakrishna, who left his work to be done by me, and will not give me rest till I have finished it. And oh, how shall I speak of him? Oh, his love for me. Swami Yogananda and others, fearing a return of his devotional fervor, asked him whether he would not like an evening stroll on the roof, since it was so warm in the room. They took him up there and diverted his mind with ordinary conversation till it was far into the night and he was his normal self again. This incident is significant, exposing as it does the depth of the Swami's bhakti. It also gives an idea of the cost at which his service to others was done. I disagree with this either. I don't think it was a cost. I don't think he's sacrificing bhakti in favor of jnana. I think he's just harmonized both, and this is what it looks like to be mad with love, but to also reason. Because I would argue the only other instance we had of this in history is the Buddha, who was mad with love, and yet there were no cobwebs in that brain. He was the sanest man who ever lived. So what does that look like? I just want to close with this idea. What does the union of jnana and bhakti look like? But anyway, let me just finish the reading and come back to that. It's a big topic and a profound idea and a subtle idea, so I'm just going to delay a bit because I don't think I'm fit to give it. But let me just finish the reading and see what happens. His brother monks ever sought to prevent such tempestuous outbursts, for these would bring him closer to awareness of his real nature. They had been warned that when he knew that, he would tear off all mortal bonds and in Mahasamadhi soar into the supreme consciousness of Brahman. Reflecting on such occasions in the Swami's life as that above related one of the greatest of his brother monks said, "You see, the Master has brought us all into this world to keep this Swami's mind diverted to external matters and to the various plans of his work, so that he may live long enough to fulfill our Master's mission. Otherwise, he may fly off at any time to the sphere of Nirvikalpa Samadhi." So profound and convincing was the impression created by this incident that no protest was afterwards made against his plans and methods of work, which I think is a mistake. I think we should always push back against anything that we consider to be of offense to our sentiment. That's always valuable. I do not celebrate the end of dissent. I do not celebrate harmony. I do not celebrate peace, because it is in that dissent, it is in that chaos that true creativity, true potential, and true progress can be made. So I want to fight. It's just that no one would fight me, at least not openly. Come, my sword is drawn, and my wine cup is filled to the brim, so I'm ready. I'm so ready. We could go all night. We could go all night too. And we could even do it at my favorite restaurants. It would be fun. So profound and convincing was so I'm not celebrating the end of the protest. Anyway, it was as though the atmosphere had been heavy with clouds of doubt, which from time to time broke in storms of conflicting ideals and had now cleared. I do not celebrate this at all. Our poem to the Divine Mother, Naomi Devim Sharirastam Nrityato Bhairava Kritehe Pravrin Mega Ganna Vyoma Vidyu Lekha Vilasinim. I praise that playful and terrible goddess who is a streak of lightning flashing across the monsoon season sky. I, who am a worshipper of Rudra, do not want to see the skies clear, for the storm itself is my God, and the battlefield itself is my hall of worship. So may the battle never end. May my opposition never be quelled, for their very presence is enlivening and ennobling to me. Their very opposition defines what I must do. So I don't celebrate this clearing of the skies. Continuing, everyone realized as never before that the Master was at the back of Vivekananda, working through him. The first general meeting of the members of the Ramakrishna Mission Association was held on Sunday, May 9th, 1897, at Balaram Babu's house, with Swami Brahmananda presiding. For the first 3 years, the association held its meetings there, in Bagh Bazaar. Whenever the Swami was in Kolkata, he attended, and to the delight of all present, he spoke and sang. For some time, the preaching and philanthropic work was carried on through his disassociation. In 1899, however, the Swami moved the mutt to Bellore, where it is now, and in 1901, the deed of trust made over its management to trustees. Where it is now. The main objects of the mutt were the training of the monks for self-realization and for the service of the world in all possible ways. Atmana mokshatam jagatitaya cha, for the benefit of all human beings, and cha, for the attainment of realization, which are actually not two things, renunciation and service, but actually one thing. The same thing seen in two ways, the obverse and inverse of the same coin. Self-realization is helping everyone, because once you realize who you really are, you realize you are everyone. The same way, like I was saying last week, the same way that you would feed yourself when you're hungry, you feed your brother, recognizing they are not even your brother, they are your own self. I cannot call you brother or sister, for such a thing is not worthy of our true connection. You are my very own self. And so what I do for you, I do for me. That's what self-realization looks like. Right? So therefore, it's like not two things, although we say cha, to express it, they can feel like that at times. But the cha is important to me. The and, which is beyond service and renunciation, is that one which service and renunciation are the obverse and inverse of. It's relative to that. Jai Ma Dimitri. Okay, where were we? Coming to the end of this. Okay, cool. I think I'm good. I think that's enough of that. So now, coming to this idea, no, there is no such thing as order. Order is the attempt of the mind to impose structure on that which can never be structured. Can you really put the sky into a jar? If order is the sky being confined into the jar, then I must ask you, is there sky, or rather space, in my cup? Or is my cup in space? Notice, space is not in the cup is in space. You cannot box up the sky. There is no such thing as order. There is only chaos. Let's do this Ida Pingala thing. So you all know that I'm very, very, very sympathetic to poetic conversation. Like, I love the poetry of Tantra. Like, I love our imagery, our symbolism. You'll often hear me indulge in such poetics. I'll talk about ghosts, for instance. I'm very fond of talking about ghosts. And just yesterday, Shunya was talking about experiences that she's had in the house. Since I was in Boston, so Shunya's been here taking care of the altars and just by herself. And they've been hearing all sorts of things in the house. And naturally, because anybody who spends any time here whatsoever will realize how fucking haunted it is. Now, we at night, huffing some belladonna, we're like talking about the ghosts, and I'm naming them, and I'm like, this one looks like this, and that one looks like that. You know that I'm the first one to engage in such conversations. I love it. I love that part of our tradition, the more mystically oriented parts of our tradition. At the same time, sometimes when we talk in that way, I'll try to move away from that. Because sometimes it's important to me that you understand that I don't take that too seriously. Right? This is very important. There's something about the way that Tantra works that requires you to understand poetry. Poetry is about metaphor. It's about metonym. Things mean other things. Or like one of my ex said, what is poetry? Things are like other things. Okay, so there's a way to speak poetically and symbolically. The problem, though, is when you take those things literally and not poetically. A poetic truth is only marginally and secondarily expressed by the words which we use to express it. The words are not important. So I don't actually believe in ghosts, believe it or not. I don't actually think there's any such thing as ghosts. Because I don't even believe there's a world outside of my own mind. That's why we were talking to Taya last night about dreams. Like, I love dreams. I love dream symbolism. But I don't take dreams any more seriously than I take the world. And that is to say, not very seriously at all. Notice, I don't believe in ghosts because I don't even believe in other people. I don't believe in matter. I don't believe in a world outside of myself. I have not yet seen such a world. I'm going to go off of hard evidence, and that's where I lead into my jnana side. Notice how I was reading that passage. If I was more poetic, I would be swept up by the sentiment and the fervor of what I just read and believe every word I said. That's what happens to bhaktas. They become so emotional that they believe everything they hear. The problem with jnanis is they believe nothing they hear. Right? They become cynical and incredibly hostile to anything anybody has to say. So imagine what it would be like to have the openness of a bhakta to receive ideas fully, but the discernment of the jnani to not only know which ideas are for me and which ideas are not for me, but to be able to interact with those ideas in a symbolic, imagistic, and poetic way. words don't necessarily mean what they literally mean. They can mean actually many different things at the same time. So when I'm talking about ghost, am I talking about ghosts? There are no such thing as ghosts, friends. There's no such thing as ghosts. How could there be? There's no such thing as a world. I don't believe in ghosts. These are goblin stories. Shiva himself said so, no? In the Vijnana Bhairava, in verses 7 to 13, he said everything you have heard up to now is but a goblin story to get people to do the right thing. Or like sweets to cajole kids into doing the right thing. Are you children that you need to continue believing in your goblin stories to be interested in this tradition? Are you children that you need sweets? The age of reason happened, the enlightenment happened, science happened. Surely, culturally, we are at a different place now than we were then. Why are you all so eager to revert to an old way of thinking that puts so much stock in superstition and fear-mongering? Isn't that what so much of Tantra is nowadays? Hatred of the modern world and its scientific approach, maybe because of an internalized and intuitive sense that consumer capitalism, which is a product of that materialist world, is not working for us. And so you all want to regress into some symbolic way of thinking which you don't even handle with tact and discernment. Listen, rituals are all fake. Rituals are all just sacred drama. The whole thing is like a placebo effect, which isn't to demean it, because the placebo industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry that works. Tantra works, but not for the reasons you might think. Tantra does not work because there is such a thing as ghosts or deities. There is no such thing as God. Okay, let me just be clear. God is a construct. God is a concept. The Buddha showed us that. Like, your devotion is not necessarily to the construct or to the concept. It is to that which the construct and the concept symbolizes. So are we going to wear the costume? Fuck yeah! For no other reason than because it's beautiful and fun and aesthetically pleasing. Are we going to worship Kali depicted as a woman with hands? Fuck yeah! Because that's something that people have experienced. But you know what else people have experienced? Straight up fucking hallucinations. Don't forget that Swami Vivekananda first felt that Ramakrishna's experience of Kali was a hallucination. Do you think Ramakrishna was interested in giving people the experience of Kali that he had? Heck no. Because through having that experience, he realized God, which is beyond all psychological and physical experiences. The point here is that God is not found in the world, nor is it found in the interiority of the subconscious mind. In other words, what you experience on a psychedelic trip and what you experience in Savikalpa Samadhi, meaning a mystical experience where you come face to face with your Ishta, are not that different. And that's why it's possible to have a mystical experience and not really be changed by it. Just as it's possible to have a psychedelic experience and not really be changed by it. You see, the point here is not the experience. The point here is that thing which the experience is a metonym for, or a metaphor for, or elliptically pointing towards. Like, God is subtler than anything that can be sensed in the physical world, and even subtler than anything that can be experienced in the psychological world. So all your mystical experiences, ghosts and deities and whatnot, and including all of your psychedelic experiences, ghosts and deities and machine elves and whatnot, and all of your physical experiences are all valid, but they are all only elliptically pointing to God. What is God? What is Kali? Kshepo Jnanam cha Sankyam Gatinada Kramat Kalanam Kali Kala Sankarshaneti Abhidhiyate. The Abhidha, the definition of Kali, is that which throws out, that which cognizes, that which demarcates, that which is dynamic, that which is moving, that which is both asequential and sequential, krama akrama, that which is the power of self-reflexive awareness, the power of imagination, the power of conceptualization, that which devours, or rather reabsorbs, all cognitions, all conceptualizations, all imaginations. That's called Kali. Is that a woman holding swords? Yes, absolutely it's a woman holding fucking swords. Why wouldn't it be? Because where does that woman appear if not in Kali? Where does the deity with wild hair and swords and skulls, where does that appear if not in Kali? If you ask me, sir, have you seen God? Like Vivekananda, we should thunder back, when have we seen anything but? In other words, the self is not other than this world. For this world, both physical and psychological, in other words, both external and interior, both of them are experienced within consciousness. So I'm not even talking about Kali. I'm not talking about ghosts. I couldn't care less. Except these things have great poetic and aesthetic value and meaning to me. That's it. And more importantly, rituals, I hold them very lightly because they're a kind of sacred drama, a sacred theater. And they work, don't get me wrong, they work, but not for the reasons we might think. These things are not as real as we think, and yet they are far more real than we could have ever imagined. Who is the power of the Tantric ritual? You are. Who is the power of the mantra? You are. Who is the deity? You are. You are Shiva. You are Kali. At every point of the way, you were only offering flowers to a reflection in the mirror. Not only were you the face reflected in the mirror, but you were the very reflecting medium in which that face appeared. So once and for all, destroy your false idols, including concepts like Brahman. And more importantly, remember that no ritual can give you you. It can never give you to yourself, for it is already what you are, not what you can attain or become. So it's so important to me then that when we talk about Tantra, we talk about Kali, we don't go to either of these extremes. We don't become overly symbolic and overly imagistic such that we take our symbols seriously. You're going to be very disappointed, by the way, if you do this. For example, I noticed this. I indulge in it all the time. So I'm like the king of symbolic magical thinking. But I hear some of you often, like just recently also, like you're interpreting rituals in a specific way. Be careful, you might be disappointed. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that you're putting too much stock sometimes in things that are meant to be metaphorical and symbolic. In other words, you're looking for real world results that match one-to-one your interpretations of things that have happened or things that you've done ritualistically speaking. Tantra works, but if you refer to Abhinavagupta, Tantra Loka 1, chapter 1, verse Anika 1, or verses 160 onwards, you'll see Abhinavagupta offers a very beautiful explanation for why Tantra works. Because there's an inherent power in consciousness, and through the symbolic and suggestive means that we've developed over hundreds and thousands of years, like it is true that we have really developed a really powerful poetic symbolic language, but never forget it is a poetic and symbolic language, meaning it's a yoga. It's something that you use. It's the way you interact with the interface, but the power is always yours, and what appears within consciousness is projected by you. And so if you use Tantra in order to create change in the world, remember that change is coming from you and appearing within you as you. Nothing is actually changed. But more importantly, the Tantra was not why it happened. You were why it happened. The Tantra maybe was just the power of suggestion to bring it forth. So be careful. Your interpretation of rituals is valid, but be careful not to be overly attached to them. Just hold them very lightly. Especially when they have to do with personal things in your life, like things that would be valuable, like say, I want this outcome in life. Be careful not to read too much Tantra into that. That's a very important disclaimer. But also remember, if you go the other way, it will be much worse for you. I rather magical thinking and poetic, symbolical, artistic thinking, because at least that's beautiful. Right? At least even if it's delusional, it's beautiful, and I will always choose a beautiful delusion over the austere LED light horror that is clean thinking, so if you become overly it's all skeptical or whatever, you won't even do the rituals. You will never be able to interact with the symbolic and suggestive power of our literature, of our poetry, of our language. And so the sad thing is then you'll miss out on all of this, and then you'll just become a dry skeptic, and life will be really boring. That's why I love Miran. I know, but they have to have nice colors or something. I'm talking about these no, not LED. What do they call them? The fluorescent. That's the word I'm looking for. Not LED. Fluorescent lights. We're talking about the white lights that they have which are meant to now I'm going to indulge in some magical thinking, which the Anunnaki have installed in the corporate buildings, in the hospitals, in the offices, in order to sap your life force and make you forget the color of warm orange light. That's all of this is so fun and so cool to think about, but not for a moment do we take it too seriously. I don't take myself seriously. I don't take the world seriously. Why should I take any stories about ghosts seriously? There's no such thing as ghosts. But also, the good news is there's no such thing as me, and no such thing as the world, at least not what I imagine these things to be. But there is reality, and I am actually that one which has kalanam, the power of imagination, in which all of this appears. This whole thing is just my own imagination, and that doesn't make it unreal. In fact, that makes it more real, more meaningful. And so if I want to engage with Tantra, I can, but I could just as easily have done the same thing through music, or the same thing through sports, or the same thing through math, or the same thing through science. Because any one of these human endeavors is working with the same user interface, just with different symbolic tools. Math is highly suggestive, symbolic, and poetic, just like Tantra. So when we apply reason, we can do it the way we just did it, where I'm reading this book, but every sentence that I finish, I pause to think about whether or not that's true for me. And more importantly, for instance, someone on the Discord the other day was saying you should be careful not to chant mantras, because if you do, then, it's harmful because, his argument was this: when you chant mantras, it creates like some energy. Now, if you don't have devotion to God and you just chant mantras, then that energy will come into your life, but it will nourish all the ghosts and spirits, or in other words, negative influences around you. So by chanting mantras, you not only empower yourself, but you empower your own hang-ups and negativity. That's actually a very good argument, because you could say, like, if I water a garden, it's not just the plants that I want to water that will get water, it's also the weeds. And maybe I don't want the weeds, right? So if I water my plot of land, weeds will be nourished by the same water that I'm offering my plants. So this guy's argument was pretty good. His argument was, if you chant mantras, it will bring power. This is verifiable. Anybody who chants mantras will very soon verify that they bring power. But power is not always good, right? Because that which is empowered might actually not be desirable. So if an asshole gets power, he'll just be a powerful asshole. He'll be a much better jerk. So that was this guy's argument. He was like speaking in symbolic language, but describing a psychological event. If I have hang-ups and problems and like personality defects, if I just bring in a bunch of power, those personality defects will become exaggerated. So if I can purify myself, as by the way Nicola is rightly pointing out, of those defects, and then I bring in the power, then it's like making sure there are no weeds and only the plants that I want, right? Like that's a very fair and just argument, actually. And so when this person like said that, I wanted to offer 3 disclaimers. Now notice just how like left brain all of this is going to sound. Like I'm going to slip into like a debatory kind of more like scientific cutting tone. But again, not for a moment am I taking this seriously, any more than I'm going to take all the symbolic mystical language of Tantra seriously. So I said, as per your claim, chanting mantras can bring some problem into your life. How do you know that A, the problems in your life were directly caused by you chanting the mantra? Aren't there innumerable other factors that you haven't controlled for? So this is like a scientific way of thinking. Like unless I do a controlled double-blind experiment in which I isolate the factors, it's really hard for me to make the claim that chanting mantras will make my negative spirit stronger. Do you know, even if I'm willing to accept that negative spirits are a metaphor for those aspects of my psyche that are maybe less than enlightened, to put it that way. So even if I accept that, how do I know that it was the mantra that exaggerated those things? Right? Like, is it really the mantra? I mean, I don't know that for a fact. And I interestingly can't know that because I don't have access to like that kind of experiment. And B, is this suggest that if one doesn't chant mantras like this, they won't have problems in life? But isn't suffering inherent in samsara? The comparative then is, and this is what the logical mind does, it compares. That's the function of the Pingala Nadi or the Buddhi. It's a discerning feature. And discernment means to compare one thing to another. Sri Ramakrishna is the harmonizer of all religions, but he's very discerning. When he practices Islam, he's just doing Islam. He doesn't mix his Islam with Hinduism. And when he's doing Hinduism, each sect of Hinduism that he explores, he practices exclusively that, almost to the exclusion of other things until he's gone as deep as he can with it. So notice the interesting thing about Sri Ramakrishna is that he's able to discern between different things and then say there's something unifying that they all point to. But you wouldn't really be able to find the unifying thing if you don't see the way each of these things are different from one another and how each of these things differently and uniquely point to the one thing. So there's again a role for the Pingala and a role for discernment. So here's where I'm going to apply the sword. And it's a sword because it cuts. So I'm going to apply this and say, well, here's the comparative. Chant the mantra and have problems, but you have the mantra, or don't chant the mantra because you believe tantric superstitions on the internet, okay, that was maybe not fair, and have problems, except now you don't have the mantra. So this to me is the comparison. If samsara is inherently problematic because it's necessarily an admission of change and temporality, and that will always bring struggle in life, then the question is like, well, either I have that plus the mantra, or I have that minus the mantra. Will the mantra necessarily add more to that? Like, is it like a significant margin of increased suffering that the mantra will bring? It seems to me that even if the mantra were to add some complication to my life, it can't really be that much worse than how life is inherently complicated anyway. You know? So like that's my first argument. Then my second thing is to say, what is the explanation for this claim? It is not enough just to cite scripture, since all scripture should be evaluated in historical and hermeneutical context. That is to say, you can't cherry pick from this or that tantra that tells you to be afraid of this or that without comparing it to other tantras, evaluating its authenticity, its historicity, etc. So if you are going to make a claim about tantra, then you should probably be referring to the tantras. But this is not so simple, because when you refer to the tantras, not only do you need to access the Sanskrit of those tantras, but you need to have good nirukta. In other words, you have to have good etymology. Sanskrit is a very complicated language. It's not enough to know the literal meaning of the word. You have to understand the roots. And not only that, even if somebody had a master of the Sanskrit language with perfect nirukta, which is the rules of grammar and etymology, and was able to access authentic tantras, which itself is kind of dubious since the game of broken telephone has been played for hundreds of years. Even if that were the case, you cannot deny the role of historicity in the shaping of tantras. Like a tantra in Avanti Varman's court is going to be very different from a post-Mughal tantra. That's an important point. And because people don't have enough of a grasp of Sanskrit, nor do they have enough of a grasp of history, nor do they have the academic integrity to apply hermeneutical lenses like these, like then it makes them very unreliable citers of scripture. So even if you're going to cite the scripture, it's not as easy as just pointing to a book in the Bible. And the thing about the Bible is it's not as simplistic a text as people want it to be either. So citing scripture is not easy actually. And here's the thing, these people don't even do that. They just like spread their superstition and fear-mongering without even citing a scripture. But even if they were to cite the scripture, I would still demand that they provide some academic integrity here, some hermeneutics, and explain the historicity, the context in which that scripture was written. And more importantly, to get into the etymology, the nirukta of what the words in that verse mean, because you can interpret it in different ways as we have. So having said that, it's good to do, and most tantric fearmongers on the internet, again, that was not too fair, but most tantric fearmongers on the internet don't even do this. It's not a substitute for reasoning. As such, what is the reasoning? So remember, Abhinavagupta provides 3 standards for epistemic integrity. The first one is Sad Agama. We are Tantrics, meaning we are the tradition based on the Tantras or the Agamas. Those are actual texts that we can refer to, like the Upanishads, like the Gita. And so that's good. We have like a basis for truth claims. So we have to use the Agama, because that's where we got all this stuff. But then also we have to have Sadguru. So Sadguru means a person who can help us interpret the Agamas, but more importantly act as like a role model to prove in the context of their own life the efficacy of the Agamas. So they check and balance one another. Without the Agamas, the Guru's claims can become idiosyncratic. Without the Guru, the Agamas can become merely theoretical or easily misunderstood or misapplied or misappropriated. So the 2 of them are checks and balances, but Abhinava adds a 3rd one. And this is called Sat-Tarka. Sat-Tarka means reasoning. Now, the word Sat is important because it's reasoning not only based on your own experiences, but reasoning based on what your guru told you, and reasoning based on what you find in the Tantras, and all 3 are cross-referenced. And more importantly, Abhinava will say in his Tantra Loka about the Shaktopaya that Tarko Yogangam Uttamam, that reasoning is the best of all yogas. Do you know why? Because through reasoning, you discover that you are not the kind of thing that requires spiritual practice, nor are you the kind of thing that can be sullied or made better by eating this or not eating that. This is the power of reasoning. It removes, as Abhinava would say, the scent of duality. And it shows you that what you are, as luminous sky-like awareness, was never something attained, nor even something in any real way veiled. Your spiritual practice was really just elliptical. It was symbolic. It was like a mirror. And you never needed it. Any more than you need tantras or rituals. Any more than you need Ramakrishna. You see, Ramakrishna is not a guy. And Tantra is not about rituals, nor is it about books. It's about something deeper, which does not at all undermine the value of Ramakrishna, Tantras, or books. It just points to something far richer, actually. Okay, continuing. So as such, what is the reasoning? I'm asking for Sat-Tarka. If you're going to talk about ghost, tell me. Say more. Don't just assert. That's the problem. A lot of people, they cite scripture, that's good. But they don't even do that. They just assert. They just say things. And why do they say that? Because they heard it from some old guy whose brains have been addled from smoking too much dattara on the banks of the Ganga. Look, I honor and revere my own spiritual culture. I'm not putting down the Babas on the banks of the Ganga. I'm just saying, India, let's do better. We have done better in the past. Who have produced the likes of Vivekananda, the likes of Abhinavagupta, of Utpala Deva, of Somananda. We have now addled our brains so much because, first of all, we don't eat enough protein. That's a big problem, I would argue. Second of all, we just don't think it's important anymore to back things up with reason because white people will just believe whatever swill we put out on Instagram. Like, you can't just like sell $2,000 workshops on the Mahavidyas based on like superstitious claims you are making about them. This is no better than like talking about the Justice League or like making claims about Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Like, I really don't take your claims any more seriously than I take the claims of someone who's involved in like a role-playing, cosplaying, like D&D type situation. Because like really, it doesn't have any academic integrity beyond that. And not to say it's not valuable. You get so much meaning out of interacting with ideas in a purely fictional context, but only because, I would argue, they point to deeper, more universal truths. They're elliptical, they're symbolic, and the moment you forget that, you forget the one lesson of fiction. Its role is to transport you beyond the words, beyond the story. The story is there to like give you something that even words can't say. even the story can't directly point to. So what is all of this but a story? And more importantly, it's tragic that you believe that your fiction is somehow more valuable than Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. I would argue the way you guys are talking about Mahavidyas and the way you're talking about Tantra, I would know because I indulge in this a lot, it's a bit indulgent. It just assumes these things are facts. But you have not provided any reasoning, nor even any scriptural backing. I would argue that nor have you taken the time to actually consult the scriptures upon which these traditions are based. That's crazy to me. Abhinavagupta, as a Tantric Acharya, was not only providing reasons, his exegetical work is entirely reasoning out the scriptures, but when he's reasoning, he's not reasoning in a vacuum, he's reasoning about the scriptures. So as a guru, he's demonstrating the highest level of academic integrity, in that he's not saying you should do this because I said so. He's saying, I'm going to now provide reasons, and I'm going to reason based on the scriptures, which I hold in mutual respect as you. It's a really important point that we've lost Sad-agama, I think, to a large extent. Just ask anyone to back up their claims with scripture, and you'll find that that question alone is deeply uncomfortable. When I do this, they usually respond with, oh, it's just books. Hare, Tantra is about the Tantras. It's about the agamic revelation. You can't just dismiss the scriptures as just books. Others who I've asked this question to have at least offered a better response. They say, okay, the books are valuable, but you don't understand them. Okay, fine. Like, sure. But how do I know that you do? And more importantly, I think I'll take my chances with the books, because either it's what you say or it's what the books say. So maybe it's yes and, like I was saying last week, I'll take what you have to say seriously, but point me to some books, and even if you're telling me I won't understand those books, at least let me try. So what I notice is a lot of people don't have the scriptural backing to make the claims that they're making. They're indulgently making those claims and then negating the role of scripture at all, and then asserting that it's Tantra. I think it's fair to say this is a folk practice, right? What you guys are doing are some kind of like bone or like, I don't know, some kind of folk thing. Like, I can't talk about that. Like, I didn't grow up in this autochthonous environment in which, I'm privy to like folk magic and like Bruja, Culandero type stuff. Like, that's the initiatory tradition, a closed tradition. Maybe that's what you guys are talking about. But you seem to be using the word Tantra. So I, as a Shaiva in the Tantric world, think that you are referring to the text called the Tantras, but maybe you aren't. And if you aren't, let's be clear about that. Right? And now I'm starting to understand Abhinavagupta's distaste for Kapalikas. I never got it before because, Shiva is a Kapalika. Like that imagery of cremation grounds and skull bowls is so central to our tradition. But now, having spent so much time with Agoras and Kapalikas, I'm starting to understand that, like, they're not interested in studying books, at least not nowadays. And then they're not interested even in backing up their claims. And they have a problem with me doing what I'm doing because I'm learned, which to them is threatening, I think. So, like, it's easy to opt out of learning by condemning it as being not spiritual. But then if you want to do that, you can't also in the same breath claim your authority from a series of texts. You see, if you're going to be tantrics, and if indeed Tantra, as I propose, means those texts, then you have to back up your claims with citation from those texts. And more importantly, that citation must be backed up also with a historical hermeneutics or kind of contextual understanding, which again, very few of us have. It's crazy to me that so many tantrics do not even know the name Abhinavagupta, Shemaraja, Maheshwarananda. They don't know who Bhaskar Rai is. They don't know who Lakshmidara is, which is weird. It's like, what are you reading then? And are you reading? And if you aren't reading, where did you get all this stuff? Which brings me to my next point. The guru is important. Guru Mukh is important. But I don't think India has conceived of Guru Yoga as the unquestionable authority of a person who is older than you. Just because someone is older than you doesn't guarantee that they know more than you. And more importantly, even if they did know more than you, like, it doesn't guarantee that their experience is your experience. So what I can understand of what my guru has to say must always be filtered through my own self-understanding. What then will guide my understanding? This last thing called sattarka. So I think what we've done in India is we've gotten rid of the agamas. We've just like renounced our responsibility to like responsibly study those agamas. And we criticize anybody who tries. But then also we've renounced the role of reason. The brain of India has atrophied so much, as it were, that the tantrics are indulging in all this superstitious ghost talk, but they're not willing to like reason it out. And the reason why they can't do that is often because they're not engaging with modernity. Like, there are ideas of physiology and psychology and neuroscience and arguably even linguistics, like the role of metaphor and metonym in language. Like, without engaging with these ideas, it's very hard to speak coherently in a modern context to a modern audience about these ideas that were spoken of symbolically in the past. Vivekananda was up to task. Without throwing out the words Ida and Pingala, he was able to include the words afferent and efferent neurons. You know what I mean? Like he's able to include physiological, psychological, and physical language, like, you know, electromagnetism and things like that, without throwing out the old stuff. And that's the joy and glory of our tantras, is that they can adapt. But it doesn't seem like the tantrics of the internet today are willing to adapt. They seem to like not value reasoning. But like I said on Thursday, some of the earliest agoris, the earliest kapalikas, like Kaundinya, like Kapila, they were all great masters of Nyaya. So like I grew up on Nyaya. I had to learn Nyaya first before I could learn anything else. And that's what I teach. When I teach in middle school, I'm not teaching them Shaivism, because what will they understand of Shaivism if they don't first develop a discerning intellect? If they're not able to stand on business, so to speak, and reason things out for themselves, then why expose them to spiritual text? They won't be able to make anything of them. And more importantly, if you teach someone something and you don't equip them with the powers of reason, then it's just indoctrination. Do you know? So the first step in spiritual education is learning to debate, learning to think, learning to reason. You must be the sanest person there ever was. No cobwebs in this brain. So that being said, I want to put more emphasis on Sattarka. I'm putting emphasis on Sad Agama so I can decentralize the role of the guru, which often becomes like a caricature of like some 70s like cult of personality guru archetype, often as a role that you play to make money. Like, I'm trying to decenter the guru and recenter the agama. But now I realize, like, even that is not enough. Because to understand the agama requires a historical understanding, a linguistic understanding, hermeneutical understanding, and all of that requires academic integrity, which is preceded by, like, being able to reason. So Sattarka is really, really important. So then, to close out this sentiment, I said, in this space, we have a zero tolerance policy for superstition and fear mongering in the name of Tantra. So what if problems come into our life? We are fearless here. We say to our problems, come at me, let the fiercest of goddesses herself come. We will conquer all with our fearless love and reckless devotion. We don't give a fuck. We just do what we want. If problems come, they will discover that I am a much, much bigger problem. Now, I am indulging in the left channel, where before I was trying to be analytical and scientific and comparative. Now I want to rouse up some sentiment. So I'm speaking in terms of poetry. Now what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to access the two hemispheres of my brain, as it were. I'm trying to access the two aspects of my personality, the scientist, the philosopher, and the mystic and the poet. And that to me is what the effort of Tantra is. You do ritual, but then you also study. And as Jayaratha so beautifully, our Jayaratha, so beautifully put in his like description of puja, it's like those philosophical things that we only understand abstractly become realized and embodied when we put them into ritual application. And more importantly, those ritual practices, which are so deeply symbolic and poetically meaningful, they become even more meaningful when we understand the philosophical implications behind them. So this is where ritual becomes the meeting place of both devotion and knowledge. Indian spirituality has always functioned in these two streams, the knowledge stream and the bhakti stream. I would argue the very nature of human experience to flow between these two channels, Ida and Pingala, the efferent and afferent, the external and the internal, the physical and the psychological. These are like thesis and antithesis. Tantra, if it's to be distinguished from bhakti, if it is to be distinguished from jnana, if it's to be called karma yoga, is that synthesis of bhakti and jnana. So now I'm going to close with one final idea, and it's Swami Vivekananda's karma idea, in honor of the thing that he set in motion on May 1st in 1897, and even before that with his birth, even before that with Ramakrishna's birth, and even before that with the first rishi, who was probably a woman, who spoke about non-duality in the Rig Veda. Like, in honor of all of those people, let me just like say one thing. What does bhakti and jnana reconciled look like? It looks like this. Recognizing that the God of devotion is none other than the self of knowledge. Once this is understood, you open your eyes to see that this world is contained within the self. And this self, which is understood to be God, is that receptacle into which all of your devotion pours. So what does a jnani look like? A supreme devotee. And what does a true God-intoxicated devotee look like? A perfect jnani. But if you blend them together in the twilight of Tantra, what that looks like is selfless, absolutely selfless, reckless, unconditional love. And more importantly, absolute, unmitigated, unimpeded inclusion. When everything and everyone is holy and pure, when everything and everyone is deserving of your love and appreciation, then you can call yourself a Tāntrik. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Shri Vivekananda Arpanam Astu. Shri Vivekananda Arpanam Astu. Shri Vivekananda Arpanam Astu. Janma.